Okay, that little red sign in the top left-hand corner says we're live, and we are live, and we're live today with Craig Simpson, who's my new friend, and Craig and I did an interview a couple of weeks ago on his website, Radiant Creators. And I'm sorry, I'm having a senior moment. Radiant Creations, right? Radiant Creation?
Radiantcreators.com.
Radiant Creators. So I was right anyway. Radiantcreators.com. And so Craig and I have been, sort of exchanging text messages and comparing notes and just everybody got a lot. I got a lot of really good feedback on the interview we did together. And I thought it was a really, really good interview, and we had some great chemistry. And you've since gone on to interview Ole Damegaard, and I heard that interview was really incredible too. Do you want to tell people about that, since that one's pretty new in the Radiant Creator world?
Yes. Well, thanks for having me on. And yeah, it was a great chat that we had. And Ole Damegaard, the cool thing about him is he's so old school, he's new school. I mean, he's been doing the work he's been doing for 40 plus years. And what I like about Ole is that he's been studying the darkest of evil for, 35, 40 years. And he's gentle, loving, kind, hopeful. Mm-hmm. I mean, and you can see it. I mean, it's so profoundly authentic. And in talking with him, the idea was to get across the idea of what can we do? Everybody would like to know, well, what can I do during this time? Everybody feels a certain exclamation point at this time. It's a really powerful time. We know it. We're changing ages. We're changing cycles. And the dark signal, as Ole puts it, the dark empire, he puts it that way. It's broadcasting its signal to an extreme. You look at the globalists, you call it the dark empire, however you want to look at it, dark forces, they've really played their hand, and it's kind of like a poker game. And they've got all their chips in, they've got this hand, and all they can do is win or fold.
That's right.
And they don't really have a choice. And so, as he was putting it, the mainstream media has never, as he put it, anywhere in the last 40 years he's been doing research and watching everything. It's never been crazier. It's never just been such blatant lies. It's never been just creating such a completely false reality. And that's why I had him on, was just to talk about, what can we do? And ultimately, for Ole, it's, I get his thing is just be loving, just be kind during this time. And also just realizing that, and you and I have talked about this, and also Ole was feeling the same way, that the past is gone. You look behind you, and where there used to be a world, there used to be a history, there's a cliff, and we're all kind of unable to really see the future. All the intuitive people who have a tendency to be able to see and feel the future, even people who are, you might say, investigative journalists in their own right. They look at a lot of news. They're interested in things. They can't quite tell what's going on. So we really are. There's a cliff before us. There's a veil, you could say, between us and the future, and a cliff behind us. And it was really great just to talk to Ole, because he's kind of on the same page we are. There is no past anymore. We're just getting a more powerful now, and also to avoid the idea of using that term, the new normal. Like, don't use that sigil against ourselves.
That's a good one. Yeah,
it's just like just call it the more powerful now. The more positive future, anything. But don't use the dark magician's sigil. Just like the whole black square everybody was putting out there on social media.
It's like, come on now. What's that?
So that the new normal is the same thing. So we have to avoid thinking in those terms. And so, and he does put it, it's a great time to not be so, it's always a good time to be less physically based. I mean, we have a body, we like it, we have a biological imperative, we want to go get a frozen pizza this weekend. I mean, we all will, or a big kale smoothie, whatever you want, whatever's next. But it's a good time just to make peace with our own mortality, because everything will be fine, but you might die.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, To me, that's the one factor that a lot of people try to avoid or don't take into account, because you could die from this theoretical COVID thing. I mean, the heightened sense of mortality is rampant right now, I believe. And it feels like if you can really get in touch with that and embrace that, then your whole strategy for living moving forward becomes very, very different. And it's about the quality of your life here and now. And if there are things that theoretically that you have to stand up for, then you're willing to stand up for them. Mm-hmm. And because there is this demarcation, there is a line in the sand, and that line in the sand defines one's own existence. And if we don't have that, then who are we? What defines us? Then we're just kind of these flagellate invertebrates kind of floating around, hoping that nobody steps on us, and that somehow we wind up in a place where, we might be able to profit and proliferate in peace. And I don't think we have the luxury of doing that now.
Yeah, and that's something that one of the main reasons in talking with Ole was exactly that. What do we do? And it's a funny thing about interviews is I oftentimes don't remember a thing that we talked about. Well, as you know, when you interview people, it's a weird state that you get in. And so you're listening while you're also compressing the next question.
Right.
And you're collecting that data, and oftentimes people will see me sort of like making notes and things like that. Yeah. And I think that the Ole interview was really powerful. And, from what I remember of it, I would say that was his real answer is be loving. It's a new age, it's a new time, it's a new cycle.
Yeah.
And, he's extremely, I like it because he's been doing it 40 years. And he has never seen it more crazy. He really agreed with that analogy of the dark signal. The globalists have played their hand completely. All chips are in. It's been a long game, but right now all chips are in. They've got their hand, and it's all a matter of do we force them to fold, or do they win? And that's what it comes down to. So if you look at the media today, if you look at the signal that they're putting out, the hiss of the snake, as Stuart Wilde used to put it, they're extreme. I mean, so it starts to become, after talking to Ole, I felt a little bit more lighthearted and a little bit more hopeful, just because, I haven't studied the evil, the darkness like he has, and he's hopeful. Are you feeling excited is a good question. Because I know this is the time to be. It's really easy to get very heavy. It's very easy to get negative, to just see so much negativity, so much that's going on out there, and how just outright dumb people can be. Unfortunately, we do have a generation or two of orcs that have been bred for this battle. It's very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But still, good is possible. Like we were chatting about briefly before this, is that we need to remember that good is possible. Mm-hmm. Good is happening too. Like you mentioned, things are going on that we're not seeing. And I'm starting to, not necessarily being, I'm not pessimistic, but I'm just kind of a realist. And I know you see it when you believe it, but in some cases I believe it when I see it. And I don't know, I'm starting to see some positivity pop up, some good things happen out there. I start to believe that maybe there has been some good in the works, like the whole Epstein Island and Clinton thing. Like I say, Clinton is a bit of a bumbling old man right now. I mean, who even cares what happens to Bill, right?
If that's even him. I'm not even sure if it's even him, but
if it's even him.
Right, yeah. Let's just say for the sake of discussion
that
he represents Bill Clinton, whatever that thing is.
He's an icon. He is. I mean, a lot of things changed when the Clintons came to power. That was a difference. So they represent a certain direction that we went in. And if he was taken down, legally, that would really be something. That would be a disruption to the current world, I think, because so it looks like, and I saw it on Timcast this morning, and he was referencing an article, and it does look like more and more connections are being made, and it looks like he's very, very tied to Epstein. He's been there, and it looks like there's going to be testimony. There's witnesses, people who were there that saw some of the code words they talk about and such. So I haven't looked deeply at the article yet. He couldn't read much of it. Timcast couldn't read much of it online just because of its content. But I was going to look at that, and I thought, well, maybe good things are happening. Maybe, it's like, don't care about Bill Clinton really, but that would be a breaking down of the dark magicians protecting themselves. Is he a sacrificial lamb? Yeah, very, very well could be. But that, to me, there's no way that event could take place if he really was legally implicated, if he ended up in court. That'd be a different world, I think. Maybe I'm just old school when I think he matters, but he matters as an archetype.
Yeah, I definitely would agree that he matters as an archetype. And the fact that Tim Pool is actually talking about this is kind of noteworthy. And the reason I think it's noteworthy is that I think Tim Pool is an operative. And this is something that Emily and I have discussed on the last Matrix MASH. And the reason I think he's an operative, and maybe he's a good operative, by the way, if there is such a thing, is because of how he's been placed in a lot of ways. And you can see that he has had a very kind of direct sort of transmission, or very direct kind of and consistent theme in his Timcasts, which is all about sort of taking down the ideological the ideological version of the left that is just a complete lie, right? This is what he's been working on, disassembling that. So if you do that, then what is the side, or what is the counterpoint to the thing that they're trying to theoretically take down? Well, it's the Trump administration. So by this process of elimination, therefore, this is the thing, or this is the order, or they are the order that we should look towards, because these are the people that want to disassemble the order. And I don't want to get into a left-right thing, but I feel like Tim Pool is definitely playing a role. So if he's actually talking about Clinton and Epstein in these terms, he's being given information, and maybe the information is out there and he's reading off of a website. I think it's worth paying attention to. And I think there's probably a there. And if you look at the actual records of Clinton on the Epstein Express, what are we talking about? 16, 17, 18 times? I mean, significant.
He's a frequent flyer, yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody's going to be taken down, he would be low-hanging fruit in that way. And if that is the case, it sets a domino effect into play. And one of the things that I talked about yesterday on my show is that we live in a society where there's a lack of closure around all these different events, whether it's JFK or 9/11 or Waco or whatever. There's really no closure. There's always a sense that there's a hidden hand at play. Information has been tucked away, burned, destroyed, and then we're off into this realm of eternal conjecture, right? So having Clinton do a perp walk, if this is true, would be one of the first times, maybe if ever, in the 20th century that we would have a significant case of some type of closure, which I think for the collective psyche in and of itself would be incredibly healthy.
No, it definitely would be. It definitely would be. And he's also a great sacrificial lamb at this point. He really is, because he doesn't matter anymore. He has no value. He has no value. It's not like we're talking about, somebody more relevant, let's say like an Obama or something. That's a whole different story. But Clinton, well, I mean, how much time does he have left? If it really is him, you look at him, he's kind of a doddering old creature.
Right.
And what would prison even look like for him? It probably would just be like a little, bracelet on his leg or something on his ankle. So he'll be fine. He'll be taken care of most likely, unless they do something else to him. But no, Tim Pool's an interesting one, because I've oftentimes felt that, I don't really see it in a negative or positive light, but that we're not always aware when an individual is produced.
Right.
We don't know. And it's not always a good or a bad thing. It really varies. But I think Tim Pool is a good guy. I think there's an aspect of him he's probably produced, and he's always been to me, it's been an interesting metamorphosis watching Tim Pool, because years ago when I was watching him, he was really was a Bernie bro. He's always been a real lefty.
Yep.
And recently, just because those guys, now there's like Timcast ILR, where him and 2 other people do a show, and it's actually better. It's expanded quite a lot. And they look at like 40K people plus live streaming, so it's definitely a popular show. And they've kind of gotten on the Trump train. Yeah,
not kind of.
They're on the Trump train. Yeah, and that's something. Yeah, and having watched so many hours of his stuff, because he's a great place to get news. He's a great news aggregator. And a lot of times you can just subscribe to them on YouTube, and you can see the titles. That's oftentimes good enough. Listen to the first couple of minutes. Oftentimes good enough. If you want to go deeper, you can listen to it. But great news aggregate, and I would say that you're looking at a Bernie bro who's now on the Trump train. He's driving the Trump train, and so. Yeah, is that authentic or is that produced? I don't know. But so far, I haven't seen, and this is just for me the last couple of years, and especially recently watching him more, I haven't seen anything damaging. I haven't seen anything dark come out of the Timcast. So far, it's still just reading news or articles. But it's interesting where he's taken his audience that definitely does exist. And hopefully it's there. I would like to. I like the idea of 40,000 people watching the Timcast ILR, because so far they're really exposing, for one thing, in a huge way, the riots, calling it what it is, because that is a huge issue where we've got violent riots where they're throwing real commercial grade fireworks wrapped in duct tape with nails in it. They're shooting wrist rockets, high powerful slingshots and BB guns and blinding lasers. I mean, these are absolutely violent riots that we have members of our government endorsing. And so I would say that with Timcast, it's great because I love anybody who's getting that knowledge out there, because we should at least call it what it is. And the media is doing everything they can to avoid calling it a riot. They'll call it late night activities. They'll call it, you name it. And I love what I'm seeing now in some of the media. They're calling it peaceful protests with a trademark symbol. Peaceful protest trademark. Like, no, it isn't. Yeah. So, I'm not sure who, as always, I don't know who Tim is per se, but produced or not, I think he's a good guy, or at least he's being used for good purposes. So far, I haven't seen anything. It's not like a Joe Rogan where I'll kind of go, I don't know. I don't know if you're a good guy or not. But with Tim so far, I think he's a good guy.
I would tend to agree with that. The thing that I find interesting, because I don't just watch his Timcast, but I watch what happens before the Timcast and what happens after the Timcast. And what happens before the Timcast is I get an ad with what's his Laura Trump, or not Laura, the wife of Donald Trump Jr. Like she's doing an ad for Trump. And the lead in for the Timcast. And then what I see at the end of the Timcast is usually a Trump press conference. Almost always.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get a Trump sandwich, right, with Tim in the middle. And if that's not telling you something, then you're not paying attention. Okay. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do think that Tim Pool is Trump's new version of Alex Jones for a different demographic, which is what Emily and I talked about. And he's trying to get the millennials, like he's trying to bring the millennial awareness and consciousness to the whole Trump experience, which is what Alex Jones did to sort of Alex Jones, I think, is technically Gen X, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, he's an interesting character and a very, I think, fairly fair disseminator of truth.
I love the idea of that, of Tim Pool being the new Alex Jones, because that would be a far more intelligent Alex Jones that put out a lot more content. Alex Jones, he's helped wake a lot of people up, whoever Alex Jones is. He has been like the first step on many people becoming a lot more aware of what's going on in the world past the mainstream media. So I think overall he's been a good force, or at least that's how he's turned out to be. But Tim Pool, I mean, you're looking at, it gives me hope for the world, because that is a way more intelligent version of Alex Jones, I would say.
Well, I think it's a more socially acceptable version of Alex Jones. That there's less of an immediate, every time you watch Alex Jones, it's like there's an immediate threat and it's right in front of you. And if you don't respond to it, then, we're in trouble. And to some extent now he might actually be right. right? On some level, he might be right. Like this is like maybe the time has finally caught up with his ever-present sense of alarm. But Tim Pool is a much more kind of socially modified and less threatening version. So while Alex Jones is based on some form of like repellent and separation, Tim Pool is more about like joining and integration. So to that point, I would say yes. And maybe from an evolutionary perspective, what we need now is a lot more Tim Pool, not completely ruling out Alex Jones, but maybe less Alex Jones, so that we can formulate both this idea of creating a sense of cohesion and people evolving, while at the same time making sure that the infidels at the gates stay there, right?
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. And I thought I'd mention recently on one of your broadcasts you did, you mentioned William Buckley and Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah.
And you know, I was never really familiar with that show, Frontline, I think it was. Or
Frontline.
Yeah. And so I asked some people I'm 50, so people who are a little older than I am, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we used to look forward to that show. It was on every week," and it's gotten a couple conversations going with people where when I decided to watch it, because I mean, as a broadcaster, as somebody who interviews people, I saw that and I was really inspired. I went, wow, William Buckley, this guy. The thing that struck me was William Buckley and Allen Ginsberg could not have been two people who were not possible to exist in the same world. Like their worldview, their existence was not compatible at all. And you'd almost expect them not to like each other. But the thing was, I was discussing with people how it almost made us like sad, but I didn't want to use that. I didn't want to make it a negative thing, but we watched it and we're like, people who are impossible to exist vibrationally in the same universe, who were on that TV show, and this was just TV that came on every week. This does not exist anymore.
I agree.
You know, and that was, I'm glad you put that out there, because I'm going to start watching some more of his interviews, because and politically I'm not quite as conservative as William Buckley was at all, but the interviews are amazing. How can Allen Ginsberg and William Buckley actually have a conversation, not agree on anything at all? I don't think they agreed on anything whatsoever, but yet it was civil. They were smiling. They were kind. I think they actually even liked each other. And there was sort of it almost looked like a comedy act. Just because there was a bit of levity to these extreme oppositions that they were throwing at each other.
Right. I mean, you could get a sense with both of them that Buckley would sit back, in that kind of Buckley way, and he's like, I can't believe I'm sitting here with this guy listening to his poem, while he's on LSD in Wales, and actually kind of digging it, right? Because it's kind of a classically beautiful poem in some ways. And then here's Ginsberg, who basically wants to say, F you, every other word to prove a point. Can't believe that he's actually having civil discourse and being inside the lines of that show and actually being able to explain himself. And even though the full, canon of his creative powers were not available, to still have a good discussion and bring things to the table. I mean, look at what he does. I mean, he gets into like criminal law, the new NYPD. They debate the virtues and the vices of Cardinal Spellman. He unleashes this, LSD-inspired poem in Wales. He's channeling William Blake. Then he breaks out the harmonium and starts, doing, Hare Krishna. I mean, where else are you going to see this shit? I mean, that just does not happen now. And Buckley's just like kind of letting it all take place and probably semi-charmed by the whole thing. And then when you go back and you start to watch some of those other shows, you begin to have this idea, this feeling, the sadness that you like were hinting at. It's like we have gone backwards. Like we have been involved in just a heartbreaking de-evolutionary process. When you go back and you watch those interviews, it's clear.
And to think that was TV. That was TV that people watched weekly. And you just realize, yeah, discourse has changed. Well, I mean, on a good note, you can still watch them. They're on YouTube. And that world that is devolving, that end of an age and beginning of a new one, end of a cycle, beginning of a new cycle, you know, you can get yourself lined up with the energy that you want to be aligned with. So I would say that those for me are, yeah, I mourn that it doesn't exist now, but it doesn't mean that it can't exist for us.
Well, we're going to get into some of this true no Gemini action when we go travel back in time, when we talk about castle law. But one of the things that, for me, like culturally, from a media perspective, Frontline is really a very Gemini kind of experience, because you have these 2 points of view, usually one conservative and one not conservative, although sometimes he will be joined by somebody who might be more aligned on a conservative way. So the idea that we can go back in time and resurrect these conversations, I think is really important. And you'll learn a lot. You will learn a great deal, because Buckley was never afraid to bring people onto his show that were very different than him in his perspective. And some of the shows that I've seen that I would recommend would be, first of all, his debate with James Baldwin at Oxford. That is a must-see. People have to watch this, because it especially connects into this idea of race, culture, and where we are now, where we can't even have a debate. And I was talking with Glenn Streeter about this last night. Like, who would be the voice on the right who would basically stand up and say, you know, the American system, or the Western system as it is, has actually been able to be a benefit to the so-called Black American. Now, who would take that role? And who on the left? Well, there would be plenty of people on the left, but would they even be allowed to have that debate? Like, that debate couldn't even be allowed. By even having the debate itself would be an acknowledgement to a system that would be inherently racist, right? I mean, just think about that. They're talking about these things. We couldn't even have that debate now. It wouldn't happen. In fact, they would try to make it happen on a college campus. There would be people that would, you know, the crowd would come and try to burn the whole thing down. This is how far we've de-evolved.
It's like we're having that conversation now, and you can see it in Portland.
Yeah.
That's the conversation. So, yeah, the one with William Buckley and Baldwin, that's on there. I found that on YouTube.
Yep.
And it's got a provocative title. I won't say it here, but you'll find it. You'll recognize it when you see it. And I only started watching it, but you just realize, wow, this is amazing. So, I mean, it's almost like it's like you're reading great literature, but you're listening to it.
Absolutely. And just a few more that I really want to recommend is Buckley's interview with Ron Paul, circa 1984, when Paul's actually running for the president of the United States. And I tell you, Ron Paul should have been president in 1984. Like, you know, if more people had been switched on, really switched on, there are two reasons why. Ron Paul was on top of his game in 1984. He was sharp. I mean, he was going toe-to-toe with Buckley around the libertarian idea of government versus less government, the conservative idea. But the other thing is that Ron Paul actually looked slightly presidential in 1984. He did not age well. So when he got to 2008 and he was running for president, he looked like, you know, a lesser member of the Lord of the Rings, or, you know, cast member. But in 84, he actually looked relatively presidential. That's a good one. And another really good one with Buckley, underrated, is his conversation with a so-called British liberal named Malcolm Muggeridge. And that is a very interesting debate. It's two just incredibly articulate and very highly educated people having a very high level conversation. So my favorite bit from that interview is Muggeridge, who was kind of a lefty, but more of a kind of libertarian lefty in some ways. He's talking about how he met the Maharishi. And he says, yes, I met the Maharishi. And Buckley says, well, what did you think? Well, I think that he was very charming, very, very intelligent con man. And that he'd figured out that if people just spent 20 minutes a day, that they would have an experience. And, you know, that is so fitting for our time. And he's a man of his times. He's a very charming, calm man. It's like,
Oh my gosh, that's
yeah, but
great.
it was really funny, but you'll go back and you'll find these nuggets. And, Buckley would have Eldridge Cleaver on. He'd have Huey Newton on. He'd have Jesse Jackson on, Christopher Hitchens, Timothy Leary. I mean, my God, there's a whole panoply. And if you want to learn something, and you want to really wrap your arms around this idea of debate and polarity, there's a whole universe of material there. So
Absolutely. And if you have an interest in broadcasting, if you have an interest in interviewing people, or really, truly just an interest in articulating yourself better, which should always be a lifelong quest, and an ability to just have better conversations with individuals, it's just required. I'm definitely going to go through and watch a lot of those shows because, those are all things I want to do.
Yeah. And the great thing is when you watch these interviews and debates, nobody is really losing their stuff. Everybody they agree that they're going to have these ideas, and they may really disagree, but it's very civil for the most part, very civil. And although I do think who was it? He did want to punch Gore Vidal. That was the one time where I think Buckley kind of got a little incensed, and they had a pretty interesting tete-a-tete. So what about you? How did you get into what you're doing and where you are? I mean, obviously you have a pretty wide palette. If you and I could talk about Blake and Buckley, and we could get into interesting musical stuff. What's your background, Craig? How did you just show up one day and say, I'm a radiant creator and this is what I want to do?
Okay, well, I've always just been a little bit weird, kind of born that way, I guess you could say. And just always had an interest in eclectic things, Like I was looking for the New Age books before there was a very big section in the New Age bookstore, So I have always had an interest since I was a youngster. And so Radiant Creators kind of was Aaron and I, the two people here at Radiant Creators headquarters,
right?
She had registered a domain just called Radiant Creators. Sometimes you think of a domain name and you just register it because it's not very pricey. You just secure it for yourself. Maybe you'll use it one day. And we were having a conversation about having creating a larger network of people, like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
And what that would look like. And we just were talking about domains. What would we call that? And we thought of Radiant Creators. And then by chance, she realized later that she'd actually had registered that domain. We went, wow, that's really a kind of a psychic hit right there. Okay, so you happen to have that. We went to register it and it was taken. Mm-hmm. And we're like, oh, crap, who's got it? And, oh, you've got it. Okay.
So it was sort of like a time travel thing, right? Like,
yes.
Your past selves made sure that you got this thing, so your future selves can remember. Oh, we did that, right?
Exactly. Our past lives, our past selves put it in the future, so we'd run into it.
That's right.
Literally,
That's cool. Yeah.
And it's easy to start a website. It's easy to start interviewing people, and that's really how it happened. I mean, I'm kind of a very condensed version of how it all happened, but the idea was that to help people. Really, here's the thing. There's always that question that we're asking, what can I do? And I think we've been doing Radiant Creators now, I realized, for 3 years. And there's a lot of interviews, and we really try to do one every week. I mean, don't always quite get it. And then sometimes there's more than one. But on average, we want to get out one a week. And it ends up being, as it's evolved, a lot of work. I mean, I can't complain. I do it because I like it. We both like it. But it's evolving. And I haven't always known what it was going to be, and it's changed. I mean, who we thought we would interview in the beginning, what it was going to be about exactly, it's kind of evolved. And so really what it's become is everybody wants to know what to do, but also everybody wants to find their own, as one of the people in the show mentioned. I hope his name comes to me in a second. Anyway, I'll remember. He says you want to connect to your own inner authority. Mm-hmm. Yep. Your own soul, your own source. And that's where you want to create from. And if you do that, then it's like Ole Damegaard put it. He says, you begin to live in the impossible. Mm-hmm. You know, he goes, your life becomes divine synchronicity, and it just becomes very beautiful. So he's like, you want to follow the path, as Ole always says, of goosebumps. And it's like,
Yeah,
Bashar,
somebody put that in the chat.
yeah,
Already.
you want to follow the path of goosebumps, and you want to follow the path of your own excitement, what excites you, like Bashar talks about. And so what we're really doing is we're finding people that are doing that, and we're interviewing them about who they are, you know, and what they're doing, and their view on things, you know. And like the last couple of people that we've had on, we had a little bit of a focus on how to deal with this crazy time. You know, and like one of them was Robert Young Pelton, an amazing journalist who has traveled to the world's most dangerous places, and it's amazing he's not dead. And he wrote a couple books, and a good number of YouTubes you can find that he's put the documentaries on YouTube's about going to Sudan, going to different places, and he's walked through the middle of genocide.
Yeah.
And he lived through it, and he documented it for the world. And you think, wow, that's amazing. And so I was asking him, you know, so the world's a little bit crazy. How do we navigate that? And because you've dealt with the craziest stuff I can imagine, you've walked through it, and you're still alive. So really, that's what we're doing. We're trying to interview people that are inspiring, to inspire others, to connect to their own inner authority, find their own path of excitement, their own path of goosebumps, and live in the impossible. That's really what we strive to do. And so in a huge way, it really is self-therapy for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I mean, I'm asking everybody, and that's the thing. And it does, as you have recently done, you were thinking about, you know, do I need to edit things? Do I need to change my method, you know, my direction a little bit? And that's one that we've been doing too, you know. Do we continue? Do we want to? What does it look like? And yeah, we do, but I've had to kind of streamline it. And I think also, like, one of the things that we're going through right now, which is a big one, is this is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time, and I do enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy it, but there is that aspect of, gosh, you know, how am I going to keep doing this? And so you start wondering, I need to, you know, financially things are okay. I mean, the show's not really how I make money. I do that other ways, but I would like to make money. It would be nice via the show. And so that's been one that I've been pondering now, is just that when I look at the show and I look at how much it costs, because being self-employed, money, you know, time is money. Absolutely. And even if you're not self-employed, if you're working for somebody, then your time might be even way more precious to you, because you don't quite have the flexible schedule. But you start looking at, wow, the investment that we're putting in, even though it pays for itself and the beautiful network of people that gets created and the inspiration, still, we're kind of going through something which is very similar. This needs to, we need to edit this a bit so that it's still something powerful that's not sort of overly stifling. Because right now, recently it's felt like a bit more of a time hole. Well, so than I really like.
Yeah, I mean, I like to speak to that, because, you know, our situations are similar, but the dynamics may be a little bit different, because, you know, the way that I've sort of created this is, for me, it's modular, so that part of what I do with this also involves the other side of my work, which is working with people on a client basis astrologically. So I've kind of brought both of these worlds together, which is good and bad, because I have to do double time in both worlds to some extent, even though, you know, Chatlandia and some other folks have supported this with a subscription model, and I'm really grateful for that. And, you know, kind of going to be building on that in another way. But the idea of the time piece is really kind of got me sort of in the wind up that I came to on Tuesday. And not that I was complaining about anything, but I was having kind of a really open and frank dialogue with myself and the people on the other side of the screen about what is the best use of this. Am I really getting the best use out of this time that I devote to this? Does it need to be whatever? It wasn't like I was going to stop, because it's not in the cards right now. But I needed to have a real kind of come to Jesus moment about the efficacy, the why, the motivation, all those things, even inside of the rubric of YouTube and the social experiment known as YouTube, because I really believe that YouTube is not just a platform or a client, it is a social experiment. And we are part of that social experiment. And everything that happens inside of YouTube is related to either higher levels of machine learning or whatever those things are. And there are things that are happening in real time as well as a result of this, because I've talked to people who have gotten various things that are associated with my broadcast, and not everybody gets the same thing. Some people get unsubscribed, some people don't. Some people get notified, some people don't. Some people have to wait 5 days for a show, some people don't. Some people have a pop-up screen that says, do you find this material offensive? Some people don't, right? So there's a whole panoply of different kinds of variables that are connected with just my little show here, right? So what is Google, YouTube doing? Well, they're learning from it, you know. And I tell you right now, everybody's chat, they're learning from all that, all these different communities. So they're, you know, basically collating massive tranches of data. And at some point, probably these things will go away. You know, because they, you know, whatever, everything's a limited hang anyway. So they'll morph the model or whatever that is, and maybe the subscription goes away, maybe chat goes, who knows? But I think just like when, you know, you and I could have sat down in a cafe, say circa 1995, right? You and I could have had a discussion about ideas and how ideas are disseminated. And maybe at that time, the best we could do would be on a BBS. And we'd be on a BBS and, you know, shooting stuff back and forth. So the tools and the technology, in order for us to do what we're doing now, were not available to us in 1995. So that means that potentially even 3, 4, 5 years from, maybe 2 years from now, there could be a whole new suite of tools that would be available for us that could make what we do infinitely easier and less time consuming. Because with your stuff, and one of the first conversations you and I had was, man, you're everywhere. You put all your shows on all these different platforms. Like, do you do that manually? And your answer was yes. And I'm like, and it's like, that takes a lot of time. And that's the time you're talking about, right?
Yeah, the production time has gotten faster where, you know, making a little show cover and then the editing, if there is any, you know, I've gotten better at just ensuring that there is no editing if at all possible, or if there is, it's just cutting off the beginning can you hear me? Can I hear you? You know,
right.
that little part. But with that said, yeah, it's manual. It's actually posting it everywhere. It takes a while. Now, luckily, you can watch like a William F. Buckley interview with somebody, and you can do most of that because it's fairly mindless, really. Once you've edited it, you're just putting it up, you know. But it does take time. And like one thing we let go recently was SoundCloud. We had SoundCloud forever, and it's like $15 a month. And I was looking, you know, $15 a month over 3 years starts to add up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just never done a thing for us, really. Very little traffic happens on SoundCloud, so we just nixed it. So I think that there is something going on, like you're saying, and I think we might be moving into an easier time. I think so. I think social media, in a way, is going back to the 90s, almost the late 90s, where I kind of have different visions of it, but I think it's changing because, you know, centralization is great, but it's not great when who's controlling that centralization is not so good. Right. That's an issue, you know. And then distribute it is nice too, but it tends to be slow, and it's not like, there's pros and cons with everything. But I think that the technology that we have, we're going to start. My little vision is, and I could back it up with technologies that do exist right now that I know of, is we'll start to see where people's social media presence will be more of a sovereign, non-censorable product that will plug into the larger social media platforms, and it'll be more automated. You know, like a good example is Minds. There's like Minds.com. We interviewed the one of the creators of that, and it was pretty fun. But the thing about Minds is it's like a Facebook basically, and it works pretty well. They haven't marketed it too great. It's kind of a desert over there, but you can download Minds. It's open, and you can fire it up and you can have your own mind's environment, which is like your own Facebook environment. And what I think we'll see is that people will basically subscribe to that, download it. Well, they will own that content. That will be theirs. And then they can basically select, yes, integrate me with the blockchain, you could say, like the larger mind's universe. And then my content is mine. Nobody can mess with it, but I can share it and it can be seen from like one portal. Like you look at Facebook, you see everything. But now, rather than every individual belonging to Facebook, every individual is that individual, and they choose to plug into the larger collective of Facebook or not, or however they want to control that. So there's a lot going on, but I do think we have to kind of get that sovereignty back where we can't be censored. So ultimately, I think we're going to move to more of a decentralized social media, because right now this is not so good. Because like we talk about numbers, like on YouTube, it's tough because really we have to just do it because we want to do it.
That's right.
Because if numbers are why you're doing it, well, that's not so good. And we like them, especially if you're monetizing it, especially if that in some way is tied to your income. And then of course, 1,000 views, if everybody buys something, well, then that's great. 1 million and they don't buy anything, that doesn't even make a difference, does it? So,
right.
How do you quantify success? And so, but if you are wanting numbers, like YouTube's tough, because I'm definitely, I swear to people, I am not whining. I'm not. But I don't think the numbers on YouTube are accurate, because we used to get a lot more traffic and it was growing. And now it's not that it's bad, but it honestly doesn't seem correct. But our numbers are growing on other platforms like Minds, not Minds, but BitChute and Brighteon. Other platforms don't nearly have the same traffic, but I'm watching those numbers begin to increase.
Right. Right. Well, I think part of the challenge with YouTube is the demoralization factor, right? Because that's part of the psychological experiment, I think, as well, to see how much people will put up with, if they, will they take this sort of, intentional / unintentional form of abuse? Because it is kind of abusive in some ways. We're just gonna unsubscribe you. We're going to unsubscribe you. We're not going to tell your people that you're on right now. It's kind of abusive. It's an abusive relationship. And how long will anybody put up with an abusive relationship? I mean, that's really the question. And I think that, we flocked to these third-party providers and platforms because they had the tools, right? But now the tools are starting to, kind of trickle down. And like there was a time when not long ago, I was streaming off my website using Boxcast, and I was dual streaming on my website and YouTube, which, by the way, is probably going to happen again, but with a different kind of focus and a different kind of platform. But to do that, that Boxcast technology or one of their competitors, the threshold is about $115 a month. And then with all the other things that you have to aggregate as part of your, thing that you do, again, that this adds up. But if that 115 comes down and starts to drop down into $80, $75, $60 a month, right now, all of a sudden, where Boxcast might get one client, they might get two clients out of that, right? So now, if we could see those entry level kinds of figures go down, then the re-centralization of the process can take place. And we're getting there. We're getting closer. So I think that for somebody like yourself or myself or anybody involved in the process of content creation, there's some really good possibilities that are coming. And the other thing that I think could be very helpful, although it does represent a bit of a different model, is, I spent some time on Gaia, and I did 25 shows on Gaia. And I was kind of there, the ramp up to Gaia's peak. And then I got off, and they still were peaking, even though I was not there. But there's something to that model in some ways, where under one roof, you can find pretty much everything you need. And I think that there could be a place for a Gaia type business model where you would get maybe 10 or 12 of, maybe not the most influential or important people in this space, but you bring them under kind of one umbrella. And it's, again, centralizing something. But at the very least, you'd be able to nurture and support their talents and make sure that nobody could mess with them, right? So I think that there's an opportunity for somebody out there who has some deep pockets and could put together a very eclectic and meaningful roster of people.
And that's definitely something we have in mind. I mean, we haven't done it yet, but that's something that we do think about with Radiant Creators as being kind of a Gaia in time. Mm-hmm. You know, it would be different, of course, but there is that idea of, you could say, banding together to, for one thing, it helps with traffic, etc. I mean, so we're not even really sure what that looks like yet, but it's definitely something that we ponder. You know, it's just a matter of what will that look like. So I think by the time we figure it out, what that will look like, we'll probably be doing it because we have. It's one thing about Radiant Creators as far as, yes, we do inspire, we interview inspiring people to inspire others. That's the idea. And we have some amazing interviews coming up the next couple of days that are going to be, we'll be putting out with people. And the network that we've grown is amazing. So that's the thing. We think about doing something like Gaia and we think, wow, we have like 3 years of interviews, three years of contacts, 3 years of people that like us, that would, you know, work with us. And so anyway, I can say, I don't know what it would look like. We definitely don't have deep pockets, that's for sure. But it's definitely on our minds. It's kind of like, I think Radiant Creators 2.0 will be more of it'll always continue being what it is right now, but they're definitely, I would like to see it be part of something like Gaia in some way.
Well, I think you would be poised to be almost like next level Gaia. I mean, you could be another incarnation of that, but in a different kind of way. And I don't want to badmouth Gaia because they gave me a really great opportunity, but the politics of that place and trying to, you know, to find like, you know, a hit record, right? That's what Gaia was about. Like, we got to find a hit record. So we'll bring a bunch of people in here and we'll see who could produce some hits, right? And if you didn't produce hits, if your single didn't pop, you weren't going to be able to produce an album. That was kind of the model. And so I was a part of that. So I had a couple of hit singles and it's like, okay, well, you can do a couple albums with us. But they didn't know what to do with me ultimately because their marketing people were millennials, you know, for lack of a better term. They were millennials and they were like, who is this guy? You know, why is he here? You know, what is he about? This, I don't know. This is kind of edgy and weird. I didn't fit the kind of the model of the program. And so that coupled with the fact that I did a very, how should I say, controversial show on Barack Obama, led to my exodus out of Gaia, which initially I was, you know, a bit disappointed about, but ultimately understood that it was all part of something else, right? And this is where we are with life, that we have to think that there are times where things happen and they lead us to this other thing that we can't foresee in the future, whatever that thing is. And so well, we've talked a lot of shop. And you know, which I think is important because it gets into this idea of how we share information and what a risk sharing information is these days. And because we're living in a time where, you know, we're really sort of inching up towards the new inquisition. This is really where this is all headed, and it's a very dangerous time because of what's allowed and not allowed. That goes right back to the frontline conversation we were having 20 minutes ago. So these conversations are important because the exchange of ideas is essential. And now the exchange of ideas is being throttled and people are being demonized as a result of this. So let's jump into that a little bit. And I want to get into the sports thing that you and I were talking about. And I think that'll launch us into the rest of the, like, our final hour here.
Yeah. And it's scary because, I mean, we think about that too. I mean, I like my life. I like the simplicity of it. I like doing what I want to do when I want to do it. And even with Radiant Creators, look at some of the guests that we've had. I mean, sometimes it can be worrisome, and I have to admit, I think about it, and that's an unfortunate aspect of our reality right now. But it's like having Ole on. You go, wow, here I am talking to this guy. Well, I've been on a list long before this, but now, wow, now I'm getting noticed even more because.
Yeah, you ought to try having Eric Karlstrom on your show.
Oh, that actually for me, I saw that and I was like, see, that's like my nightmare interview, to be honest with you. Oh God, this has gone really wrong. All right. Oh, so
I don't think it went wrong. I actually think it went right. Right. Because well, I want to get into that interview just a little bit. Keep going though. Keep going.
Oh yeah, no, that's all. Yeah, I think that I think about it too, because you look at a lot of the people we've had on. I mean, I know no one's going to mind. It's not going to get you in any trouble. But, with the current, cancel culture and outrage mobs and everything like that, we can have people on the show. And there's people that we have had on the show where I'm like, oh gosh, I hope I don't hear people, chanting outside the window one day, no justice, no sleep or some crap. I worry about it. I do. I think about it. I have to think about it. But like,
no soup for you. No soup for you.
Yeah, no soup, no sleep, whatever, And so it is true. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, risk taking, no guts, no glory, and that's the thing. I go, well, this person definitely. I know they're on the radar, and talking to them is going to put us on the radar. And I know it's affected our YouTube numbers for sure, because depending on what you say. I won't say them here. I don't want to hurt the numbers, but there's certain things you can say, and I guarantee it's going to just kill the numbers on your video. People won't see it. And people that I know who know me will tell me, oh, I didn't know you put out an interview. And they're subscribed to us and such.
Right.
Like that. And I'll say, yeah, I'll send it to you. I'll say, go look for it or something, because they didn't get notified. And yeah, literally there's keywords you can mention and it just disappears. No one's going to see it. And we're definitely, I won't say victims of that, but we're definitely aware of that. Yeah.
The Karlstrom interview was, for me, probably one of the most challenging interviews. Not because of his content, by the way, but how people would perceive his content and perceive his language. And, sort of like, the elephant in the room. And for Dr. Karlstrom, like, this is just it. This is a matter of fact. I'm okay, and I'm reconciled talking about these things. I'm like, okay, well, how do I respond to this? And by the way, a lot of the stuff that he said, I am not in disagreement with, by the way, because it's out there. Like, if you look, it's out there. So what my responsibility was in that moment was to try to make the conversation bigger. Like, how do we expand kind of this closed loop that you brought into the conversation, that there are good guys and there are bad guys, historically speaking, and probably provable by the nature of the revelation with what they've shared. You cannot deny the truth. The truth is out there. Wait. But how do we expand the closed loop of that conversation? That for me was challenging, but I actually like that. I like to be able to get to a point where we could bring people just, put their nostrils right on the third rail, and sniff it, and then come back from it and say, well, what did that feel like? What did that look like? Were you scared? Did it threaten you? Why did it threaten you? Was there something there that you learned and you saw in that moment that could be applicable if you could get past your conditioning around whatever those things are or have been perceived to be? So for me, I think it was one of my favorite interviews. I enjoyed it, and not everybody enjoyed it, and very intelligent people had very good things to say in terms of the feedback of that interview. And I appreciate their feedback, but I think, but these are important. That was almost like a Buckley moment, right? That was almost like a frontline moment in some ways, now that I think about it.
No, I get what you're saying. That it was, it looked a bit challenging, and so it did give me a lot to think about. Nothing that I wasn't necessarily aware of, but it was good. I would say that it's like on Radiant Creators, we don't live stream right now. It's something we need to get back to. We used to, but we need to kind of get back to that. But during his interview, that was one of those ones where I'd kind of be glad that I was recording and not live, because I'd be thinking, do I want to this is where, being, no guts, no glory kind of comes in, because do I want to put this out there? It's one of the things about pre-recording is I have that choice and I can edit. In general, I don't edit anything anybody says. But yeah, that was a challenging moment, and you did expound upon it enough to make it clear. But yeah, he'd be an interesting person to. I'm not going to do it, but I would go deeper into those things with him. If I did interview him, and he'd be a good one to host a debate with. Get some people who see things.
He would be fearless. He would be fearless. And I do like him, actually. I think he's very bright. I think he's very committed to his cause. And you don't find that. See, that's the other thing, is that you don't find that commitment with a lot of people. Now, you may disagree with his subject matter, or you may disagree with who he, points the finger at in terms of villainy, but you don't get that kind of commitment either. And that's something, right?
No, it's true. It's like, and it is very William F. Buckley. It is very frontline, because when I looked at that interview between Allen Ginsberg and William F. Buckley, I mean, they shouldn't have liked each other, but they did.
Yeah.
And they were civil, and it was rowdy. It was like a Shakespearean play. It was really something. So, I mean, it is something I've had to do that too, like on Radiant Creators, where you interview somebody because you feel that what they have to say is important. Like for us, the inspiration is important, or what they have to say is important. Like we've had people on the show that I didn't even like. To be honest with you.
That's interesting.
But I felt that their inspiration was important.
Right.
And so, because I feel like these guys are doing something and it's inspiring and it needs to get out there. And so that's one of the things I look at with the show and interviewing people. I would always recommend, and what we're trying to do, and in a way I would just give people a tip when they watch it or listen to it, is it really is about extracting the inspiration that person has to offer. And that inspiration might be specific to a topic, to an ideal. It depends. But in general, our interviews, we try to do them in a way that isn't where you're extracting the inspiration, and it's really what the person maybe does is almost secondary. So like with that guy, maybe some of his views, correct or not, they might frustrate people. I get it. But really you're looking at his inspiration. You're looking at something deeper, what he has to offer. Like you could say his commitment, his passion to what he knows. And so, yeah, that's where I think, gosh, it sounds so silly, but that's almost like the safe place in all interviews, is where you're just sort of trying to extract that inspiration. That's like one of our big things, like, for instance, having Robert Young Pelton on. I love him. He's an amazing guy. He's definitely a very heroic figure to me. I think he's very, very powerful character. Definitely someone to check out. But with that said, and it can be, we do not agree politically on anything.
Interesting.
I mean, we don't, but on the show, my hope would be that nobody would see that. And I'm not interested in arguing about things like that on the show, because this guy has so much to offer and he should be more well known out there. And my hope with the 2 interviews that we've done with him is that it truly got people to connect not only their inner authority, but their inner badass, and go and live life much more boldly with much more courage. And to me, that's putting like some silly political agenda or my worldviews on hold, because sure, we don't agree on anything, but he's definitely inspiring regardless.
What's the thing? What's the thing that inspires him or inspires you? The inspirational piece, the piece that adds to the human story, and you can walk onto that and say, "Wow, this person can do this." And look what they've done. And I may not agree with them politically, but man, they put themselves in harm's way and face death and yada, yada, yada. I mean, you bring up a really good point, because a lot of times there's this kind of, a sort of asterisk with people, right? There's like a clause in some ways that if we don't fully agree with who the person is on some level, we can't accept something about what they're sharing that might be helpful and informative in our lives. And so therefore, we're just not going to listen to that. We're not going to listen to that person. Like E. Michael Jones is another person who I've had on my show 3 times. And I really like Michael Jones. And he's challenging for people. He'll say things about homosexuality that not everybody will agree with. You know, he'll say things about Catholicism and relationship to Judaism, and not everybody will agree with it, right? And I may not even agree with Michael on everything. But the fact is that Michael Jones is somebody who knows more about Catholicism, Abrahamic religions, and sort of how modern culture has metastasized into really the cesspool that it is now, than I might know in the next 2 lifetimes. So I respect the heck out of that. And then when Michael began to really focus on this idea of the Logos, and this kind of universal consciousness, that of course for him is rooted in his Catholic faith, but for me can be experienced and translated into my own world, then it was like, okay, we have a tabula rasa here. There's something that I could really get behind, you know, not in spite of your other kind of beliefs or qualifications, but in adjacent to that. And that's a guy that I find inspiring. And a lot of people think he's an anti-Semite and want to have nothing to do with him. And I think he's actually a very loving man, but you don't understand that from your perspective because we've all been conditioned to think in a certain way. People need to fit in a certain box, that they have to conform to certain ideas about how we're all supposed to like each other and get along with each other. And it's like, I don't think that always needs to happen.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's talk about the pro sports thing, and then we're going to jump off into the second hour here. One of the people that I wanted to bring up is Michael Porter Jr. And let me see if I can just grab this really quickly here. Michael Porter Jr. plays for the Denver Nuggets. And the reason I think he's interesting and somebody worth talking about is because he has broken ranks with the NBA. And he came out with a tweet about the coronavirus. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Now, Michael Porter Jr. Was a phenom, an absolute phenom. He's only 22 years old, so he's a Zoomer, okay? This is important to wrap your head around. He's not a millennial. He is a Zoomer. So we're talking Pluto and Aquarius, Neptune. I'm sorry, Pluto and Sag, Neptune and Aquarius, and I believe Uranus and Aquarius, right? So here's the ESPN. I'm going to share this with you guys. Here's the ESPN story about him. Now, the NBA is in Orlando in the bubble. So they're trying to put their season back together and have this tournament that will theoretically allow them to have a champion in their mutated season. So Michael Porter Jr. just decides that he's going to take, a hard left off the res. And he talks about, so the Nuggets, here's the story, see if we can bring this up here. Nuggets talked to Michael Porter Jr. about coronavirus population control theory. Well, this is interesting. So now the team is responding to his tweet, and now he's going to have sort of the light hand of re-education in real time. So what did Michael Porter Jr. say? Let's find out what his tweet says. If we can find it. If they actually have it here. So basically, Michael Porter Jr. was saying, I'm not wearing the mask. I'm not wearing the mask because basically it is mind control. And this is actually the coach's response. This is Mike Malone. So, here we go. They're talking about, this is just so fucking stupid with the mask thing. So Denver Nuggets president of basketball operations, Tim Connolly, this might be the Tim Connolly character, has spoken with Michael Porter Jr., the second-year forward, theorizing the coronavirus pandemic is being used for population control. Connolly did not make a statement, but Nuggets head coach Michael Malone said he learned about Porter's comments, which were made on Snapchat, when he boarded the team bus to practice on Wednesday morning. And Malone says, obviously, I'm not the thought police. Malone said during a Zoom session with reporters, I'm not going to tell any one of our players what they can and can't say. All I would say is just be sensitive to the current situation in our country and throughout the world in regards to coronavirus. Michael Porter and any other player on our roster, they're entitled to their opinions and ability to have free speech, and I will respect that as long as it doesn't become a distraction. So this is great because now we got a coach that has his players back. What Michael stated, being around our players this morning at breakfast and practice, has not become a distraction at all. Porter's comments made headlines as the coronavirus death toll approached 150,000 in the United States and stood at 661,917 around the world. And this is what he said. This is a synopsis. Personally, I think the coronavirus is being used, obviously, for a bigger agenda, Porter 22 said on Snapchat. It's being used for population control, just in terms of being able to control the masses of people. I mean, because of this virus, the whole world is being controlled. You're required to wear masks, Porter added. And who knows what will happen when this vaccine comes out. You might have to have the vaccine in order to travel. Like, that would be crazy. I mean, this is the open thought process, the transparent thought process of a 22-year-old who has a bit of a platform. He's in the NBA, and if he recovers from his knee surgery or injury, he would become an elite player in the NBA. Trust me, I've seen his game. He is pretty spectacular. So Malone has repeatedly advocated for his players to speak their minds about nationwide protests against police brutality and not to let NBA games distract from the Black Lives Matter movement. The Nuggets coach said he would not muzzle any of his players from expressing their beliefs, but he said the Nuggets will continue to try to educate players. So this is a really interesting event on a number of levels because, number one, we have this player who is expressing something fairly controversial. And number two, you have a coach who's not making him walk it back and giving him the same opportunity to speak freely as his other players would about Black Lives Matter. I think it's important, and I'd love to have your thoughts on it.
A shift that I see happening recently is you're never going to make the outrage mob happy. And, when they come to attack you, it's better not to reverse yourself. And I think that I'm glad that this guy has the courage to do that. And especially with the platform, especially being very visible, because it's like when we interview people that I know are probably under the radar, like say like an Ole. You go, wow, that's going to, now the evil eye of Sauron there and Mordor is going to look at me too. I'm going to get, seen. But, well, fortune favors the bold. You got to, no guts, no glory, live your life. And when we ask ourselves that question, what can we do? Well, that's what I was given. Do this. Okay, I will do that, and I'll just trust in whatever. Well, I think this guy is doing the same. And it's very, very courageous because, he's on a team. He's with other people who probably think differently. You got your locker room. I'm sure that life's not gone well for him there. Maybe some agree, maybe some don't. But especially, he really is in the sights now, in that front line of the outrage mob now. A lot of us can say what we want, and no one other than the people in our immediate circle are really going to know and care. But at the same time, he made a very, public statement. He has a platform. There it is on a web page. You can see that people are looking at. So, he's really taking it on. So I admire people who do that because, yes, the outrage mob is coming for him. It already has, have no doubt. I'm sure there'll be lots of people complaining, saying he should be kicked off the team. He's a murderer. You name it. I'm sure it's already happening. Right. And I think he knew it was going to. And so really it's people who stand up to the outrage mob right now that I think are really important. And I'm glad he's doing it because he must ask that question, what can I do? And that was the answer. And so he did it. And if you're certain, then you can handle it. Because I don't know, I one of the things that disturbs me most, that, like, what disappoints me in people, what people do that disappoints me, I think, more than anything else, is when they'll say something like that, then they reverse themselves when the outrage mob comes.
Right.
You know, so now he's going to be tested. But it's great that that coach stood up for him. He's standing up for himself, because, yeah, at this point in time, on so many different topics and so many levels, there's no speaking the truth without the outrage mob coming for you.
Yeah. Now, whether or not it actually is a help or hindrance, Michael Porter Jr. is mixed race. So, will he get the benefit of sort of the social shield to some extent, right? If somebody unlike Michael Porter, like the next guy that I'm going to bring up, and as a sort of slightly controversial person, if somebody like this fellow had said what he said, would he be subject to a different sort of judgment and a different sort of even punishment, perhaps? So let me bring up Tom Pope. Tom Pope is a English footballer, and he plays for a team called Port Vale, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, might be a second division team. I have to find out here. I'm not familiar with Port Vale as a club, but this is the Guardian now. Now, this happened about 5 months ago, and Vale is Tom Pope is a striker for Port Vale, and he was suspended for 6 games for a tweet that he had linking the Rothschilds to every bank on the planet. And the tweet is actually kind of innocuous in some ways. Somebody asked him to predict how World War III would result. And he said, this is what he tweeted: we invade Iran, then Cuba, then North Korea, then the Rothschilds are crowned champion of every bank on the planet. That was the tweet. So he was suspended for something that was a potentially anti-Semitic remark. So Pope says, how is it racist? He replied, seriously, is someone out to destroy me or what? Someone asked, how does World War III end? And I replied, when said countries were invaded and they all have the banks, what's the problem with that? Seriously. Then he said, they own the bloody banks. There's no racial malice whatsoever, and anyone would say the bloody same. I didn't choose a side. I merely stated they own the banks, and that's it. I mean, it's very clever in a lot of ways. Like, this guy is very clever. And what he's done is he's basically used language, which is a weapon that the left, the so-called left and cancel culture, loves to use. And he's used language to show them that they're insinuating that he's an anti-Semite and all the baggage that goes along with it. He's saying, look, they're bankers, right? Can we agree on that? And at the end of the day, who wins? It's the bankers. So he put them, on blaze there, right? But he still wound up getting suspended for 6 weeks. But the one thing he didn't do is he didn't walk it back. And I think what we're seeing is the end of the walking of the back. The walking back stuff, when you're backed in a corner, there's no place to walk back from. So I'd love your take on that. Not only that, but the cleverness with how he responded to that tweet.
Well, it was very William F. Buckley, wasn't it? It was articulate, like you're saying. He used language very well. And it was humorous. I don't see it in a personal attack on anyone within that tweet, but what he was saying. So I like that he has an excellent use of language. He understood what he was saying. He probably thought about it a little bit before he sent it, or maybe he just did the stream of consciousness, but it's eloquent. It's beautiful. And him getting a hard time for that that only helps promote it, and there's nowhere really left to back up to. Like I was saying earlier, how you look behind you, there's no past anymore. It's all gone. You look behind you, there's nothing but a cliff back there. The past is gone and the future's uncertain. So I think people who are, I'm going to use that term awake, humbly, but people who are awake. He's definitely an awake person. He realizes, well, there's nowhere to step back. That's that's to be obliterated. That's the void. behind me. There's nowhere to step back, really. Whatever is going to happen, and I can't see it. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to, send out this amazing articulate truth bomb, and I know it's going to explode. I'm going to get some of that shrapnel, but I'm doing it. So what gets me about what you're saying, and that the stepping back is done, is I think it's true. But I think what is important is that it really is the wise people, the awake people, the people that would be part of this tribe, that are the ones who are realizing that first, who've been realizing that. And luckily they're the ones who are speaking up, because see, like I said, and that does remind me of that William F. Buckley, that interview, that show that now I'm going to go back and watch a bunch of those, because that's the power of language, the power of humor, the power of truth. I mean, he really tweeted something very amazing. And then his response, I mean, and it shows you, if an individual has the ability to read, to understand subtlety, I think he did something beautiful. I think he knew he'd get in trouble for it, and he did it anyway. And then even his rebuttal to it, not backing down, and the way he did, the language he used. I mean, even though unfortunately too few see it, he shows what babies are really running this world right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I found interesting about his comment was that the people who were insinuating that he was posting something anti-Semitic were actually the ones who were insinuating the anti-Semitism, right? They were the ones that were like making that connection for him without him making that connection, right? I mean, it was totally brilliant in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, and he got attacked by accusation, and that's what currently I'll just call it the left always does. Everything is always an accusation like that. This is anti-Semitic. It's like, you're the one saying that. Like, no one said it, but like you're saying, no one said that but you.
That's right.
Everything that their arguments are always an attack. They're always an insinuation. They're always trying to say, oh, well, you're obviously this and that. And wait a second, like, what are you talking about? And when you look at his eloquence and his grace in responding to it, it just drives it home. It's just a real Mike Tyson punch in the face, just boom. Anybody with any sense, anyone who can, because they understand subtlety, who can read, understands language, wit, humor. Anybody who'd like a William F. Buckley interview is going to read that, is going to hear that, see that, and they're going to go, damn. So I really think he undoubtedly woke, and I don't like this term, woke people up, but he woke people up. I think a lot of people were woken up by that.
Yep. Another person who is certainly of interest in this conversation is Stefan Tuitt. And I brought up Stefan Tuitt yesterday, who is a player, a different kind of football, American football. And I want to get the right link here. Now, he's actually a fairly good player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The guy's 302 pounds, and if you're going to have an issue with him, good luck with that, right? Good luck with taking issue with a 300-pound, 27-year-old man, right in the prime of his existence. And he said that he is not going to kneel when the NFL cranks up its engine again. And let me throw this up here. So we're seeing again, we're seeing these people now starting to break ranks, which is really, I think, very inspiring, because it gives people a sense of, we were talking about inspiration, right? I mean, we got a footballer in England, we got a basketball player in the States, now we got another football player here in the U.S. who are saying, screw this, man. So here's Stefan Tuitt, chooses to stand for flag because I'm a proud American. Now, look, you may think America is whatever, and you don't have to stand for the flag. And quite frankly, if they don't want to stand for the flag, fine. They don't have to stand for the flag. That's up to them. Personally, I don't even think the national anthem should be played in sporting events. Just take it away. It's a sporting event. It's not, it's not a recruitment meeting for the United States Army. It's like, so Tuitt I'll give you his words here in a second. And they're pretty important words. He says, I stand for the flag because I'm a proud American. Like previously stated, this country has provided and rewarded my family in so many ways. Through our perseverance and hard work, I will continue to honor my country and be an example to my children to stand for what they believe in. In regards to police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement, I will support these causes through other means. It's unfortunate that a couple of unprofessional individuals have caused such havoc in our country and damaged the trust of its citizens. I will not let those individuals steer me from the fact on the opportunity this country gives for everyone. God bless, right? So he may have had a little bit of help from his publicist on that. Who cares? You know, I've seen other statements that were crafted by him that were, let's just say, they were more blunt in their messages, right? Much more blunt. And this is his first message. Also, I'm not leaning for the flag, and screw anybody who have a problem with that. My grandmother was an immigrant. The Caribbean and age worked her ass off to bring 20 people over the right way. She had no money and educated herself to be a nurse. She's living good now. Right, so that was off the cuff. And I think his statement or reply to it was, let's just say it was, I thought, probably a little more well-crafted and thought out and manicured to have even more impact. So, but this guy is not backing down, right? Again, we see somebody who is standing up to the mob and is not, kneeling for cancel culture.
And he's saying it boldly,
Yeah.
and he's also saying it from a place of authority. His family is new to the country, and look what he's achieved. So I think he's coming from a great place of authority, and I love that he says, screw people who have a problem with it, and I like it, and I think it's powerful, and things are changing, and people can stand up now. So it's most important to do so and to not back down, because think about it. Could he have made that statement 2 weeks ago, even? And it makes me realize something has changed. I don't think that statement was possible even last couple of weeks. I think it's possible now.
I think you bring up a great point, Craig. Why do you think that's true?
Now, that's a good question. I don't really know. Ultimately, because people have begun to, and I think that makes a big difference. I think also as people begin to, they realize, like, really nobody can hurt you if you're going to do it. It's just the outrage mob. And maybe it's people talking about the outrage mob. Ultimately, that's something Tim Pool has done quite a lot, and other commentators have done, is that, look, the outrage mob is coming. You know it. And for the most part, they're going to have their outrage. They're going to have their tantrum, and you just ignore them. You're eloquent. Like all these players have been very, very eloquent in their original statements and their responses. And the outrage mob will move on to someone else. But also, I think, now that I think about it, I say I don't know. Maybe I'm unsure. But what comes to mind now is the importance. I think that we have to, and that's the big difference. People don't really have a choice. They know that they have to, and sometimes you're just led to it. It's like, when I was in the military, when I was a youngster, and I remember once I sent like 20 or 30 people to Captain's Mast. They got in a lot of trouble. There was an incident where something awful had happened, and they tried to cover it up, basically, and there were some officers involved in things. And I went, oh, hell no. This was wrong. It was bad. It should never have happened, and it can't happen. I can't live with myself if I let this happen. So I marched into the captain's office, and I said, this happened. I lived with death threats the rest of the time I was in the military, and I knew somebody might just take me out. But I realized that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't say something, So I knew maybe I'll get killed, maybe, but there's no way I was letting it go. No way. Not for anybody but myself, really. And so I wonder if these players are just realizing that they can't live with themselves if they don't say something, And that also we're at a time where if no one says anything, if we don't get these bold people, if they don't stand up, if when it comes to you, when you ask, what can I do? If it is given, do this. This is for you. If you don't do it, that there really is something to lose. Because like we were mentioning earlier, the globalists, the dark empire, they have a hand, they got all their chips in the game, and they're going to win or they're going to fold. And right now, if we don't create that pressure, they will win. And we lose who even knows how much. So these people really are very heroic, and they're the first ones to stand up. And I think it's because they can't live with themselves if they don't. And I think also they just realize that it's time. It's time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like something that I've been I can't say happy to see, but I'm going to just say happy to see is like I've been very politically active many years for pro Second Amendment stuff. Not so much here in Arizona, but when I lived in Washington State, very, very politically active. I mean, I was out there with the in the NRA booth, handing out info and talking to people and arguing with people, and you name it. I mean, been to the the Capitol over there in Olympia in Washington many times for meetings.
Yep.
I mean, I was very involved in pro Second Amendment stuff there, mainly because it's so under attack in that state. Well, the thing was, and also just being an individual. Like people who are listening to this, who will listen to this, people who are aware. I'm going to call it awake. I'll be humble, but that's just the best word I have for it. You've seen this coming for a long time.
Yep.
You've seen it coming. You knew it was coming. So oftentimes it would happen, let's say, in the aspect of Second Amendment stuff. Well, that's only hurting a certain group of people, usually in a certain state, in a certain way. And most people, even most gun owners, can ignore it. And they do. Oh, it's just this. It's just my magazine capacity. It's just whatever. But I saw it there happening. Our rights being eroded. As Alex Jones puts it, the prison planet. That door has been closing for a while, and one day you're going to hear this. You're going to hear it. It's going to close, and it's over. They won.
Yep.
Who knows how many generations before humanity sees freedom again? And America is the shining city on the hill. It is. The globalists have to take this country out first,
Yeah.
And so I think these players are seeing that, I think they're just seeing this powerful moment that we're living in. And so aware people, awake people have been seeing it coming for a while. For me, definitely working with, pro Second Amendment stuff. I've seen it. I've seen the same forces are what's been destroying the Second Amendment, and the First Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights for quite some time. Just that it wasn't global. It wasn't affecting everyone at once. So it was easier to do. And now we have this moment where, hey, it's game time, people. Now everybody is seeing what a few people have been seeing for a long time. So the solace that I have right now, rather than like fighting and losing another Second Amendment battle, well, now it's the freedom of humanity. And it's not a shock to me. It ain't new. I knew it was coming. Just none of us exactly knew that it would be here today, that this was it. This was game time right now. And so these players, I think they're seeing it, and they're really, maybe that's the thing about these players, sports are always very intriguing. And I think in America, most of us we'd like to have sports players that were role models, that were heroic, that especially kids could look up to, and maybe these guys are playing the role that America wants them to have, that the world wants them to have. Maybe these are heroes stepping up to be who we idealize them as. It's my take.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great take. And I think that timing is also a big factor here because, we went through basically the shock, I wouldn't call it awe, but shock and awe of, post George Floyd, right around the beginning of June, and watching the mayhem and watching the violence and watching the burning and watching the looting and watching the carnage. That was really shocking for a lot of people. That was for the average American who had not wrapped their head around these things actually happening. Like watching those things being beamed back to them is very traumatizing, like really traumatizing. And, and then of course, after the trauma hits, they slip the programming in. But we've had a little bit of time now since that initial, sort of, ugly burst. And I think that in the interim, people have begun to rapidly recollect their senses around certain things. And I think the timing is part of this. And, I just think there's another metaphysical kind of component in here that has something to do with equalization and equalizing the other part of the game that was thrust upon us and stuck in our face, that there's this equalization process that the universe is involved in that wants to kind of make it a fair and even playing field in some ways. So I feel like some of that is starting to come into play. But one of the things that, you and I were going to talk about, we're going to get into it now, is this whole thing that happened in the year 1536. And one of the things that really sort of inspired the talk a little bit is the idea that Craig, here we go. We're back. Sorry, went dark there for a minute. I don't know why. I don't know what happened, but we're back again, and we'll continue to go forward. So danger
Yes.
and risk versus playing it safe. That was a theme that you and I were talking about. And why don't you tell people about this idea of what happened in 1536 with the relation to the castle law and how people were at a certain point given this opportunity to defend themselves.
Yeah, there's a book, and this is where I got this from. It's by Joyce Lee Malcolm. It's called To Keep and Bear Arms, The Origin of an Anglo-American Right. And, I referenced that because, I've been involved in, pro-Second Amendment stuff for quite a while. And, it's not just some half-assed belief that I have. There's a lot to it. And this is a great book at seeing what is the history of the Second Amendment. Because, she goes quite a ways back, but I like in the book one part where she does mention it was 1536, and I forget exactly what country, what city it was. But the crown was having issues because what used to happen there was that it was a rowdy place. So you had cities, you had merchants, of course, and you had different classes of people, different socioeconomic realities. Well, basically, one thing that was happening there was you did have a lot of crime because there wasn't police like we think of it now. If you wanted to go from here to the next town, you had to go down a path. Well, if you're a merchant and you're trying to go sell pies in the next town, you might end up brawling. So the thing was, people were better with their hands than you might think. And the idea of the militia was that every city or town, however it broke up, basically at the edge of town, at the edge of the city, the men usually would practice fighting. There's always been martial arts at the time, depending on how people were fighting. So you'd have people learning to wrestle, learning to box, learning to use a sword, a musket, depending on the time, bow and arrow. So every town kind of had its own protection, and every town and city did its militia, depending on their size. Well, that was a bit of sovereignty right there. Well, if the crown wanted to go and attack some other crown because they were offended or whatever their nonsense reason was, maybe they wanted some better potato growing fields or something, they had to talk the militias into doing it. Well, for the most part, militias were usually not interested in dying for nonsense. So it limited the crown's power. So that's the idea originally. When we talk about the militia, that's where it came from. It's ancient to Europe. Well, in 1536, there was issues where it was, civil asset forfeiture was happening quite a lot. So if you were under the crown, you were considered a ward of the state. You belonged to the state, to the crown. And so if two people had an altercation and one killed the other, then you damaged the crown's property. You've stolen from the crown, and they would take all of your assets. They would take all of your money and throw you in jail. If you had a lot of money, they would take all of your money. You could hire a lawyer and you'd stay out of jail. And that's kind of how it rolled. Well, anyway, the crown was having a hard time keeping this going on. And in 1536, that's when castle doctrine was created, because basically the crown was about to lose its head over this. And the crown said, look, okay, militias, I will respect you as a sovereign being, and also individuals. If I, the crown, have the ability to protect my castle and my lands, then you have the ability to protect your person, your body, and your home, and your farm, and your lands, your property, and your life, basically. That is now legal as long as you do it in self-defense. And so that's the idea of the Second Amendment. The individual, the citizen, and the militia have the right to keep and bear arms. Because ultimately, as we mean it in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, as it has evolved, it's your right anyway. It's a natural law, but also it is a hedge against tyranny. That's ultimately what created it in the first place. So 1536, in reading her book, is the date that I think that the Second Amendment was originally codified, and they called it castle doctrine. And that's basically what it was. 1536, you have the ability to protect your person and your property. If I, the king, if I, the crown, can protect my castle and my lands, then you, as a sovereign being, can protect your body, your land, your property, basically. And of course, as a militia, you may protect your town or your city. And so that was the creation of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that we're at the castle gates, or the walls of the castle right now, doing our best to defend our rights, whether they're Second Amendment or First Amendment or any of the other amendments at this point. And I think it's an important sort of evolution in terms of the individual. And I hadn't heard of that until you brought it up and brought it to my attention. Now, did you get there through your relationship with the Second Amendment and supporting that? Is that how you discovered the castle doctrine?
Yes. Yeah. It was her work, the Joyce Lee Malcolm. She mentioned it, and to keep and bear arms. And like I say, if one wants to understand the evolution of the Second Amendment, really where it came from, it started in 1536. You could say even before then, but that I think is the real codification. That's when something was signed. That's when something was made law, and it rode across to America in the Blackstone books of law. And those books were open on the table when the Constitution was written and the Bill of Rights was written. So, it's old, and it's inherent. And the thing is, if you look at Europe, they lost it. Yeah. But we did not. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's been a great journey for me, and it's helped, I grew up as a youngster with a .22 rifle and a shotgun and hunting, I've always liked, shooting, and for all those reasons, I like it. And also I was in the military, and so yeah, after I got out of the military, living in California, I got involved in pro-Second Amendment stuff. Living in Washington State, got involved in pro-Second Amendment stuff. I just inherently always knew that just trying to disarm us is wrong. There is no, especially when you begin to, as to me, it just was a path that just opened before me. I should study this. I should know more about it. And that book is a great way to learn and know more about it, to understand the spirit of it and where it came from. And then once you understand it, it's sort of like wine. Yeah. If you ever go on wine tasting and you taste a wine, you're like, oh, that's okay. But then when the winemaker describes this process, the deeper, knowledge about this wine, then you taste that and you go, wow, this is really magnificent, And so when you learn more about the Bill of Rights in our country, of course, and also the Second Amendment, when you learn more about it, you go, yes, this is good. This is a good thing. And anybody who wants to take it away from us, anybody who wants to slight it, is doing a bad thing. And now, absolutely. And that battle, like say, that helped wake me up over the years of all things. That's been a big awakening for me. I've always been spiritual, but that has opened a lot of perception to me. And like I say, in working with the pro-Second Amendment causes, that's where I saw today coming. and a lot of us who were awake in different ways, we've all seen it coming. But I was like, man, over and over again, we're just getting punched, we're getting beaten. They're taking away our right to defend ourselves on so many levels. And there is no good reason for the state to do that. There never has been, there never will be. And with that said, now, because, we allowed that, which we shouldn't have in many other things, well, look where we're at. Now it's game over if we don't win this next battle.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly from Vegas brought something up in the chat that you and I were talking about prior to the show. And she says, law of property. Let me throw that up there. Let me get there. Let's see. There it is. Law of property, what makes a Republican republic and not a democracy. You and I were talking about ownership prior to being on the air here. And Kelly brings up something very, very important, which is the law of property. But the law of property would imply that there's ownership involved. And when there's ownership involved, something metaphysical happens with people and their relationship with the thing. And we're being moved into this communitarian kind of world, communitarian environment. We had Lark from Texas on the show who is really articulate about this whole process of communitarianism, which has been in play for a long time. But it is antithetical to ownership and property ownership. And I wanted you to chime in on that because you had some pretty strong opinions and positive opinions about the whole idea around property and ownership.
Yes, and in my study, my humble, slight study of it, along with the Second Amendment, yes, I mean, inherent in our, now I don't know about the rest of the world, I haven't studied it, but just in, European history, I mean, integral to our culture and how the state is run, I mean, property, well, basically being a sovereign individual that may own something is inherent. And that's like, you could say castle doctrine was an affirmation of that. Yes, you have the right to exist and to defend your things, your body and your property. Well, that also is saying your property. So really, property ownership is inherent in how we make money, our economy. That sovereignty is very important. So you have the right to exist and to defend that existence. You own something, your body, your property, your business that is yours, and therefore you can charge for that. You can grow your potatoes and you can sell them. And the thing is, without that sovereignty, really, life doesn't work. Society doesn't work. So there was a while where I was an organic farmer when I lived in Colorado, and if I cannot have my property, my farm, and grow on that, and that ultimately the state backs that up and says, yes, this person has a right to that, you cannot come and take that from them, then how can I do business? How does commerce work at all? So the sovereignty of the individual and the ownership of property. I mean, if I have a storefront and that is mine, well, no, rioters, you cannot come in and take it. It's mine. Right. And so it's really something, being a sovereign individual that has a right to exist, that has a right to own property, and that owns property is really, it's integral to our economy and how our civilization works. And if you go, through history, look at Europe, then you'll find that, that's, especially if you look around the 1536, if you start looking back at that time, you'll find that, that's where a lot of those assertions were made and emboldened that, yes, this is how it's going to work. And so, and it's funny, I think we're seeing this come back into play. Good things can happen. And I think it's always important to remember that. Something I noticed was that couple, I forget their names and I forget where it was, but the couple that went out, waving guns around, the AR rifle and then her little pistol.
I think it was in Joplin, Missouri, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Now, I would say, I'm not sure if their tactics were necessarily sound. I would not recommend doing what they did. I think that they did break some laws technically, even in a castle doctrine state. But the thing is, that event did bring it into the forefront. It made people think about it and have to know the truth. Like, well, what is castle doctrine? Do you have the ability, and when do you, to defend your property from a riot? You know,
Yeah.
so a lot of the stuff that was I think happened back in the early 1600s, 1536, the beginning of a codified Second Amendment. Now they're being tested and they're being looked at. And that couple, they may have been oblivious to what they were doing, but it does look like it will be found legal. And it's really brought the issue, like these, I would say, heroic sports players, these people, they may have been more dumb than heroic, to be honest with you, but
there's something really weird about that whole scene, though.
Yeah, something happened which was important.
But there's something strange about the whole thing. Like first of all, he's a lawyer. The guy's a lawyer, and he theoretically should know the law. And the people that he represents tend to be people that are more closely related to the people who are actually protesting at his house, right? So he's a civil rights lawyer, this guy. And I don't know, there's just something odd about that whole event. It almost felt like borderline staged to me in some ways. And then the question would be, well, why would it be staged if that's the case? So I tend to, because when you look at her and the gun, it's like she's never even held a gun before. And why did they even have to come out of the house? I mean, I don't believe that those people who had stormed the barricades of their McMansion were of any threat to them. I don't believe that. And so this is where the tactics thing comes into question. I mean, what if they just stood behind their door and watched the mob go by and, had their AK-47 and their funny little gun or whatever? But what happened now is that I think it was the DA who, there was something, it was almost like they set a trap for the DA. Like there was something about the gun, the handgun, that was inoperable. Like they made the gun inoperable. So the DA was charging them on the basis that the handgun was operable, but they found like something about the gun that was inoperable. Like even if she wanted to use the gun, she couldn't have used the gun. So there's something weird about that whole thing. And it's like, I believe it's good that people can talk about it, but the whole thing just seems so awkward. The guy's out there in his pink Izod shirt and, his khakis and, it just, I don't know. It seemed a little false flaggy on some level, but
and the memes that came from it are priceless. Oh my gosh,
funny. They're very funny.
Oh my gosh, and like they were perfectly posed for those memes too. They really were. I love the one where you see her with a rather angry looking face and she's holding the gun like nobody who's ever shot a gun would ever hold it, with any knowledge whatsoever. And it says like live, love, laugh.
Right.
And so, I would say that when they came out of the house, it was very obvious that they had zero weapons training whatsoever. Very, very, very obvious. Yeah. And the guy being a lawyer, I'm like, well, wait a second. I mean, one of the things that I've always recommended to people, I stand by it, is know the law better than your gun. Seriously, that is important because the law doesn't give a shit about what is right and wrong. It does not. That's a fallacy. It's what's legal and illegal, and you need to know that more. So, I mean, seriously, you have a better chance of winning the fight if you know the law better than your gun. And this guy being a lawyer, I mean, you got to be very careful about brandishing. Don't brandish. You cannot do that. Aiming a gun at somebody is assault. And
there's a samurai code. You don't use a gun unless you don't pull a gun unless you're going to use it.
Yes. Yeah. You're in bad legal standing if you do. And so to me, I'm not sure if he did. I don't know, but I know she did for sure. Like you're on your yard. And I would just say, be careful. I mean, castle doctrine and stand your ground are pretty much the same thing. But I would just make a case. I would say I'm not a lawyer, cannot give legal advice, but I have studied these things quite a lot. I'm fairly knowledgeable, more than most. And I would just say that you are not going to have any legal standing if you brandish a gun in your yard, pointing at somebody on the street. That is so stupid. And I think a lawyer would know that, like you're saying, kind of false flaggy. I think a lawyer would know that. If nothing else, they were on shaky ground. And anybody who's a lawyer, I think, would also know that, the judge may be sympathetic. They may not, but you're already out a lot of money by the time that happens. And if you go to a jury, that jury may be sympathetic, maybe not. You know, you
Mhm.
you are entering no man's land when you do that, and I think a lawyer would know that more than anybody.
Absolutely. Now, conversely, there was the event in Michigan, I think, kind of near Kalamazoo, if I'm not mistaken, where there was a couple coming out of a Chipotle, and they were being harassed by a mother-daughter team, and the woman was actually fairly, how do I say this, uh, reserved, or she was composed when dealing with these people who were obviously fishing. They were fishing for a conflict. Like, you bumped me. You bumped me. You know, the whole "you bumped me" thing. And you need to apologize, right? So she did that. She actually, they're pulling away from the Chipotle. She rolls her window down and she gives a sort of, hey, I apologize kind of moment. Save face, okay? Save face here for you. Right? And then she rolls the window up, and then they go after the vehicle, which is, the new sport, which is taking on vehicles, which is stupid, the new national pastime. So they get behind the vehicles, it's backing out, and they're pounding on it like as if they've just been hit. Okay. So now and it's all, captured on their cell phone. Now they're fishing for a lawsuit, that they may have been hurt. The woman gets out, and unlike the woman in Missouri, you could tell this woman has firearms training. And she comes out and she's got a gun. And she says, "Get the F away from the car now." Now, again, probably not the best idea to pull that gun out in that situation. But when people have been witnessing, hours and hours and hours of kind of mass trauma, have they been programmed to get to a certain point so that that gun comes out a lot easier and a lot quicker? And did she actually avert a crisis that could have been even worse by doing that? We don't know. But they've been arrested. The guy lost his job. Her husband lost his job as a result of that. So here we go. It's another situation. I think that one was real. And I think that she was in a place of just sheer panic and fear.
Yeah, and that's where I think people need to, like we're saying, this heroic, sports players stand up and start to turn this tide a bit, because like one thing I would tell people, and I think many don't realize this, is that owning a gun is a political act, and if you use it in any of those situations, it's a political act, and ultimately, there's law, but also there's the law of politics, and you're going to fall prey to that, and so be very, very careful, because before you use any kind of deadly force, or you even, just basically brandish to protect yourself, you got to think about a lot of stuff, the law and politics, etc., because you've now put yourself at, it ain't just an outright, it's not just an outrage mob coming for you. It's the cops. And, one must realize that when the cops show up, they're not really your friends in that situation. They are, they work for the DA and they work for the judge, and they're there to basically have you incriminate yourself. And they're very, very good at making you do it, because unfortunately, our legal system is based on, the DA and then of course the defense. Well, the DA makes good marks when they win, and they love throwing innocent people in jail. And so be careful, because if you use deadly force, if you even, brandish, you've already put yourself at risk. And right or wrong, honestly, and I want to be optimistic, but chances are you probably will go to jail. So be careful. Be very, very careful, and think about it. Is deadly force even worth it? So yeah, if you're in a car and it gets attacked, leave your windows up. Try to get out of that situation. You can show a weapon in the car, that's fine. But until they break that window, until they try to get you, you don't have legal standing. Be very, very careful. So if I was just, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, can't give that advice. But if I was, to, one of the things we do, like when I was in the military, and I think you'll see a lot of, attorneys do this. And I think you'll see also a lot of people who teach self-defense, deadly force, people who do firearms training, martial arts training. They'll oftentimes have kind of after-action reports. They'll go over something, oftentimes situations that were horrible. And if I had to, critique them in that car, I would say, you should have stayed in the damn car and called the cops. And because those people were not a threat to you, and you brandished, you assaulted them, and they were not a threat yet. Now, once they break your window, blow them away. But until then, don't. And that's another one. Always sleep with your windows locked and your doors closed and locked, because, before you have legal standing to defend your home, they got to break something to get in.
That's
Keep
right.
that in mind. They climb in a window, they didn't break in.
That's interesting, because there's another case about a father who beat the hell out of a guy who was 21 years old. And the guy was in his daughter's bedroom. This is just a few weeks ago, 14. And he was theoretically, assaulting, raping the daughter. Well, he had to get in somehow. Right. So there's this theory that the daughter actually let the guy in. But the daughter is 14, and there's a clear, standard here. It's a clear law. You don't do that. This is in Florida, by the way. So the father just beats the living hell out of the guy. I mean, really beats the hell out of him. But then the father decides he's going to get a gun and chase the guy down the street with a gun and start firing, either warning shots. I mean, he's so incensed. The guy is a Latino father, and you don't go into the bedroom of a Latino girl's home when the Latino father is home. You just don't do that. That's like you're crossing a Maginot line there, Mason-Dixon line. So anyway, the guy's now charged with excessive force. Like the judge said, or the DA, whoever said, he was okay to beat the living hell out of him. True, that's what he said. He said, but when he pulled the gun out and started chasing him down the street, that's where he crossed the line. So, again, even in your own home, you could beat the living hell out of somebody. But once he left the home, that was it. You should have just let him go. So I think, we're living in a time where people are just triggered and programmed. People are pissed off. They're frustrated. They're resentful. And that's the other side of the trap. You can't get caught in the other side of that trap.
No, you don't want to. And that's something I'm seeing that, along with you asking, why do you think those guys did what they did, those heroic sports players, but or more accurately, you're asking, why do you think this is the time? Like what's changed? A few weeks ago, that probably wouldn't have happened, or there would have been much more fallout. But now it seems like it's time where we can start to push back. And I think another thing that makes me, realize that, and then maybe those, sports players are seeing that too, is that people are unhinged. I mean, like that story that made a lot of national news, where the lady, pepper sprayed people who weren't wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And I just look at the way people are treating each other. We are way too close to violence constantly. It's really weird, but it seems like in our culture here in America, and I haven't seen this before. Maybe I just lived a sheltered life, but it seems that people are way too prone to violence, and they just think it's all right. And maybe it's the outrage mobs that have caused that, but it seems like that's the case. Are you seeing that? Like, I can't believe how many cases of violence I'm seeing basically based on outrage mobs, and people really seem to think they have the right to hurt people they don't agree with.
Well, I think, you're talking about another time in America where there was, I hate to use the word tolerance. I think it's a weak word, but I think people used to give each other a much wider berth in terms of social interaction. Like there was a social lubricant involved. Like, you're cool, I'm cool, we don't mess with each other, all good, right? That social lubricant is gone. And whether it's the result of some form of social engineering, whether it's some kind of, astrological influence or all of the above, now it's like the brakes are grinding, on one another. If you had, disc brakes, you had the right pad on there, it was fine. You had drum brakes. If you had enough brake fluid, it was fine. But when those things, the pads got too low, or the fluid and the drum brake got too low, you're in trouble. You didn't have that lubricant, or if your engine, didn't have enough oil, it would seize up and grind to a halt. And so we've lost the social lubricants. And now we've got, and I brought this up, now people are being rewarded for being snitches. This whole snitch culture thing is really incredibly toxic. We have these two people who were tested positive for coronavirus, whatever that test is, and they decided to walk their dog, and they got basically ratted out by the manager of their apartment. And they were walking their dog, washing their car, going to the grocery store. Neighbors were furious. So the cops got involved. This is in Key West. And the cops rounded them up and decided, you're going to jail because you violated your quarantine around this whole thing. And this is not the sort of the first. And by the way, this, and I think we're actually snitching on somebody and ratting on somebody is an act of violence. It's a passive aggressive act, but it's still an act of violence. And they're violating your privacy. They're violating perhaps your own property, depending upon what we define as property. There was an incident in San Diego happened this last week where there was a couple. They weren't even under quarantine. They were at a dog park, and they weren't wearing masks. And a woman in mask came up and maced these people. Now, that is an act of violence. We've lost the social lubricant. The social engineers have been so adept at completely atomizing our ability to relate to one another that the social lubricant is gone. And when it's gone, you find people indulging in excessive behavior, in extreme behavior, and one that's not really good for our society at large.
Yeah, we don't have that eloquence of our frontline anymore. Where people can be absolutely incompatible. Their views will not, they're not going to back down whatsoever, but they could at least communicate. And so that was incredibly great to see the front line with, let's say, William Buckley and Allen Ginsberg, two incompatible worlds that were clashing at the time, but yet these two can sit there and in good spirits disagree and communicate. And that, I hope people who are listening watch that, if we link to it, because you watch that and then look at our times and go, holy crap, what has happened? We can't even disagree on anything. Like, I see a lot of really nasty arguments over just, corona numbers. People will say, like, here in Arizona, the numbers are supposedly up. And and oftentimes somebody will say, well, if you can believe that, they'll say, well, we don't really know what those numbers mean. They can be made up at any time they want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then somebody will be like, "Bleh," and they'll go into outrage. But unfortunately, people don't communicate. They don't really take the time to talk and understand each other. There's no expounding upon anything. There's just rage, and that's it.
Well, I mean, where's the example? You would think that there would be some leadership in this area. And, leadership is AWOL. And I mean, that's gone. We don't see that being exemplified theoretically in Capitol Hill. Whatever you think of Washington, there was a time where these discussions could take place. They could debate an issue, and they could, kind of, go to the wall with it. And whether that was theater or just, sort of biding time for their lobbyists to come in and line their pockets for more money, it didn't really matter. There's a different process at play. And when Trump came in, that went away. That was just gone. That there was no ability to have a civil debate. It was all about shutting down a particular person, shutting down a particular ideology, and shutting down the people that were associated with us. So there's no examples now of being able to do this, to be able to have this kind of discourse. It's all just been completely shut down and eradicated.
Yep, and that filters right down to the probably most evil force on earth, which is the mainstream media, and you look at it there, and that's one that I see, and this is one that I'm watching for as far as the turning of the tides, people being people speaking the truth, and then just basically taking on the outrage mob, not backing down, is I think, and I saw it on Timcast. And I hope that we continue to see this. It's very important. It's like we've had riots in this country, and there's some excellent articles on that where they've affected not only cities like Portland and Seattle, which we expect, but like right here in Scottsdale, Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah.
We had rioters running through our backyard because there's a mall nearby. and it got looted, basically, and then a Mercedes dealership got damaged and all kinds of stuff. And like here we are in Scottsdale, which is kind of like, if you're not really familiar with it, it's like the pretty part of Phoenix.
Right.
It's like the higher end Phoenix. That kind of thing doesn't happen here. We don't really have political issues here. Everybody's fine.
Right.
But we had riots here, and talk about a bunch of crap. It's all opportunistic. There was, nobody who was rioting has ever had a bad day with a cop in their life here in Scottsdale. It's a bunch of crap. And so we saw that. But you look at what's happening, like in cities. So Americans in general don't like riots. We don't like them, and we don't like even protests, go away with your nonsense. And so what I'm seeing is they're in Portland and in Seattle, they're finding that, the fireworks being used, which they're throwing at the federal officers and the police, these are
launching. They're launching the fireworks, not just throwing. These are projectiles. These are like small missiles is what they are.
Yeah, they're launching like commercial fireworks, the things you can't buy, big things. They're wrapping them in duct tape with nails attached to them, And so in the Middle East, we call that an improvised explosive device, an IED, and it's terrorism. Here, it's not even happening here. Supposedly, they're using slingshots, and a real slingshot with is a nasty creature shooting ball bearings at people.
Absolutely,
they're shooting the cops and they're shooting the federal officers with that, and they're frozen water bottles. You name it. I mean, and of course the laser beams that they have.
Blinding the cops.
Causing like retinal damage to the police. Hopefully they all recover, but there's some people who've had their eyes damaged and they even know. They go, the green lasers are more intense. That's why you see them all green. And so you look at this, and there's a guy, he has a YouTube channel. He's called Austin Knights, I believe is what it's called. But he actually is amazing. So he has this big like Brady Bunch looking screen up with all these different riots happening around the nation, and he'll go full screen ones where things are happening. And so just because I was curious, I watched a night or two of riots here in this country, and I'm like, that is war. They are violent. They are trying to hurt people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if anything, it's not a matter of like, I'm not an authoritarian bootlicker. I understand. I mean, I know that I'm all about state sovereignty, and I think we need more of it. Okay, but this is not the way to do it. And so these federal officers and these cops have been absolutely using restraint. Are you kidding? Like try to blind me with a laser and then shoot me with fireworks and see what happens. These people they've been pros. They've been professionals. They've taken they've had a lot of injuries, and they have not hurt people like, I think they would have been able to, that they could have done. So I guess what gets me is that's one that I hope we see turning around. And I hope that comes out in the mainstream media. And I hope that comes out in our consciousness. And I think it's starting to, that these people are garbage terrorists. That's it. Forget it. You don't have a cause.
Yeah.
And then the reality of trying to, and I don't care if you're just in the crowd watching, you're guilty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are. I'd agree with you. Totally complicit.
Yeah.
Totally complicit.
And so I look at it and go, I hope that's the next thing that comes out. And I'm not sure how you expose that, but I think I'm starting to see it. And that is really difficult because we've had a media that has lied. I mean, they will even call it things like late night activities, peaceful protests. And you're like, wait a second. I mean, in this universe, I guess I'm just old school. There is right and there is wrong. And there's outright evil. And the mainstream media has been doing evil to cover up evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I hope that's the next thing that enters consciousness. I really think that would be a big one.
It seems to be happening because people are, I think initially with the shock, right? With the shock of the whole George Floyd thing, where people were like, "Oh God, just don't mess with us. We'll take a knee. Just don't mess with us." And they're responding. Actually, we were reacting to the shock moment. But by the way, there were people who I believe were inserted into those moments, whether they were police chiefs, certain police officers, church leaders. They were inserted to go along with that program. That was a role they were playing. It wasn't that they were moved by their conscience. I believe that these people are insiders, and that they were part of the operation, and so they were there to further this idea of capitulation, right? That they were there to, bring this idea that we had been defeated. I mean, really, that was the whole thing. Like that there was a war, and there were people on their knees, and the war was over, and that they took down a bunch of statues and they won. Right? Isn't that really the psychological operation that's in play here? But that's really not the case. That's not the case at all, because they haven't won, and they may be close to theoretically winning, but a lot of that is all based on some form of not even predictive programming, just programming in general. So, a lot of what we saw and experienced was shock and terror theater, really, to terrorize people into a state of submission. And I think people now are moving away from that, recollecting their senses, and well, hold on now. Hold on. There's something here that is worth fighting for and standing up for. And I think that's what you're talking about. And I feel like we're going to have more of this until the next event, which I want to ask you about. What do you think is going to happen in the next 30 to 45 days? We got 97 days before the election, 96, 97 days. What do you think is going to happen in the next 30 to 45 days? Because I think something big is going to go down.
Well, I saw that I've been watching Chatlandia, as you call it, go by, and there's a lot of great stuff going by. It's just hard to, follow it because it's going by quickly. But Masaki's in there, and he mentioned that the Sunrise Movement is planning the purge for the electric season. Yeah, sure, the election season. Hope it doesn't happen. I have been learning more about that, the Sunrise Movement, and that is, a frightening movement. That appears to be the organizing, force behind a lot of, an organizing body that's kind of guiding the rioters, And
well, they're kids. Like the Sunrise Movement basically really took roots post Parkland, and they were using Parkland as an opportunity to politicize youth in high school. So a lot of the walkouts that took place across the country after the whole Parkland thing were organized by Sunrise. And Sunrise started off as a climate change. It was like climate change meets the brownies or something like that, but it's really a radicalized group that was incubated by other groups like Momentum and so. And I've covered these groups before, and so they're actually grooming our children to attack the shit out of us and hate us, and mostly young girls. So the word in the street is that they're telling these young kids that when the next event happens, that they're going to go out in the streets with hammers and they're going to beat the hell out of people. Like this is really what they're promoting. And I think it's incredibly dangerous. I think it's dangerous on so many levels because these are mostly young women, by the way, who are going to wake up very quickly into an environment where if they think that they can wield a hammer without any consequence, that they will be in for a very rude awakening. And I think it's terrible that that they're essentially using children as shields, as human shields. Like if you see a 14-year-old girl in the street and she's got a hammer and she wants to go plunk somebody, are you going to be more or less willing to take that girl out? Your instincts as an adult, you would say, no, it's a 14-year-old girl. Why would you do that, right? But this 14-year-old girl has been weaponized and could do some serious damage at that point. So they put us in this this kind of Gordian knot as a result of what they're doing. And I think the Sunrise Movement, and I know who's behind it, they should be absolutely and utterly defunded. It should not be allowed to have any kind of status, any kind of nonprofit status at all.
Well, what I see in the next 30, 60 days, you might say like through the end of the year, it's hard to tell. I think there's a bit of a veil across the future, but just like the time is now to start saying true things like those sports players are doing. And I think
Yep.
also saying true things like getting the truth about what the rioters were doing, the violence. So I think these things are starting to happen. So I think if enough truth comes out and it gets into the conscious enough, then I think that we'll just have a smooth cruise. There is a chance that ultimately the election cycle that's coming up is uneventful. There's a chance of that. I think it all depends on how much. It kind of depends on this moment, So maybe we'll just have a smooth ride through the election cycle. But I see Masaki out there. He says the Sunrise Movement are the new Red Guards. They're being directed to go to the homes of conservatives and RNC mayors and elected officials. And we're seeing that now. This is kind of the other side of what I've been seeing is where you do have this, organized, rioters who are now going to people's homes and, no justice, no sleep. Of course, no one even knows what they want, especially them. So we are in such an unhinged time. I do think there's a possibility that things die down, smooth election, life gets back to normal. I don't really know. I can't really see it right now, but I would say that I think one thing is certain. I don't think there's going to be a second wave. I think it's already here. That's just me. I think they're going to just push harder. People talk about a second wave coming in November or September. I think it's still here. I mean, I was watching, it's so funny, right after a Tim cast. The next video was a live video where Fauci was being interviewed by Congress, and they were drilling him. They were not being nice to him, which is good. So, wow. That's a great question. What's going to happen the next couple of months? I don't know. There's a veil. I think that I'm certain, not a second wave. I think that we're still in the first wave, and I think it's just going to intensify. I think that it hasn't played out the way they want. They don't have the buy-in that they want. They don't have the fear within society that they want. So I think they don't have time for a second wave to be designed. I think they have to just push the current one harder. I think they're doing that. I don't think the Gates plans of, chipping us and all that are going to go away at all. So I think that they're full on right now, and I think they're going to continue being full on. And so we'll see how that turns out. That's all a matter of, are people going to wake up enough to kick that out of our reality? I hope so, but I don't know. Other than that, we may have rioters in the neighborhoods, but then again, how would that go? I mean, you can do that stuff downtown Portland, but you drag that through, like, let's say Scottsdale, that's going to end. That's not going to work. Federal officers and police protecting a courthouse is one thing, but people protecting their neighborhoods, yeah. Well, those rioters better hope that lawlessness has not happened to the extent that they might like it to, because if ain't nobody going to come and count those bodies and figure out who killed them, those people are short-lived.
Yeah.
So, anything goes, doesn't it? I mean, do you really have a good feeling of what's going to happen in the next few weeks or months? I think there's just so many probabilities, and I really feel like it's funny. It's been hard to see, but I think we're starting to get little streams of intuition, of insight, just like people are speaking the truth now, and they're bearing the slings and arrows of the outrage mobs, and maybe the truth about the riots is coming out. I'm starting to feel my intuitive abilities to see the future again. But it's still unclear. But I'm beginning to see it.
Yeah, good, excellent. Well, I agree with you, and even though there are times I may come across as either edgy, some people view me as being doomy gloomy. I'm not doomy gloomy. I live with a certain kind of perception and consciousness, but I have been very optimistic this entire time, and my optimism began to well up even before the year started. So I believe we're in a time where things are very interesting. And when things are kind of up in the air and chaotic, a lot can really take place, as long as you can navigate through that chaos and not be subjected to whatever kind of programming, one side or another side, or what faction wants to put you in, because the energy is really interesting. So I think that this is a fantastic time for people to be able to get to another level in their lives. If you're willing to face your fears, if you're willing to work within the restraints of certain conditions, which we clearly have socially, and there's an opportunity to get up to speed very, very quickly, perhaps faster than any other time we've been alive or been conscious and aware, in the 20th century and even beyond it. So I think this is the next 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks is going to be fascinating. We've just had 4 sports figures. And by the way, sports tends to be very, very conservative. It's a team environment. You play along, you go along, you have 4 guys that are breaking ranks. I mean, you may think that that's nothing, but that's something. That's actually quite something. So we've just seen that, and we're going to see more of that, and we'll see the other side, theoretical, other side double down. And now we're in this really interesting kind of cosmic drama, like a Mahabharata kind of environment where, this whole reality becomes very operatic and very mythical, and heroes do emerge, and there is pathos, and there's tragedy, and there is transcendence. I mean, we're moving into that time where these things are going to be with us on a day-to-day basis. And who would not want to be alive during a time like that, really, on some level, because everything is almost Wagnerian to some extent. So we think of Wagner, we think things like the ring cycle and this idea of this kind of heroic progression where we go on this hero's journey, and we're all on the hero's journey now. And I believe that, like yourself and the people that are on your website and your world, that we're waking up to this possibility of the hero within. And everybody has something to do. Everybody has something to do, whether it's you walk away from your boring, shitty 9-to-5 job that was really handcuffs anyway and figure out a new way to live, or get out of a relationship that is a compromised relationship, or, find a hobby and or craft that you want to devote yourself to, or whatever. These things are important. So I feel like this is the time where it's just coming online, and we're going to need as many people online as possible. And I want to say one more thing. We'll wrap it up here. You can have the final sort of summation here, Craig. But I've had Sonia Barrett, who's a wonderful person and a really great thinker. And one of the things that Sonia talks about is this idea of the game, the game that we're in. And so this is a really important time to understand that we are in a game at a very high level, a cosmic level, right? And that as a result of being in a game, we're being shown these opportunities to see things and to experience things and to morph and transcend into our higher nature, to participate in the game at a higher level. So I think that's what we're going to see for the next 3 to 4 weeks. And the events that precipitate that, I believe, will be quite dramatic. That makes sense.
Yep, it's like the 4 of Cups in the tarot, where you have the individual pondering the cups that have fallen over, and I feel like that's our past. That's, we're entering a new cycle, and it's easy to look and mourn our lives as they have been, but now there's that new cup coming out from the cloud, from universe, from spirit. So really, I like what you're saying. This really is, and I think it's what we titled when you and I talked last, and we put that up on Radiant Creators, was called the rise of the individual. And I think really this is the rise of the new hero's journey 2.0. And I think that we're starting to see those heroes emerge. And if you're listening to this, then you're one of them. And if you've asked, what can I do? I guarantee it has, or it will come to you. And when it comes, you'll be able to handle it. Do it.
Absolutely. Again, astrologically, we've got Chiron and Aries. And Aries is the risk taker, the pioneer, the warrior. And Chiron is risky. It's vulnerable, right? It's vulnerable. So to be somebody who has a stand, to be somebody who stands for something, or this a vulnerable position. But I'll tell you the best training you can get for that, and it's so easy, is to go to a store without a mask. You want to face your vulnerability. You want to face people judging you. You want to face your ability to talk your way through that situation. It's such a low-level dojo kind of experience. And I know you like to be the guy that blends in, but you're doing that consciously. You're doing that consciously. And I get why you're doing it. But I really feel like if you want to test your mettle, you don't have to go stare down a mugger. You don't have to go, hand to hand with a cop. Go wear a mask in a store where you're not supposed to wear it. But condition your mind before you go into that store to say, this is going to be my experience. And I'm going to walk in here. I'm going to have an experience. I'm going to shop. I'm going to get what I need. I will not be confrontational. You don't want to be confrontational. You don't want to stare down the people that have the mask. They'll fucking turn on you. All you want to do is you just want to face yourself. Really face yourself, or deface yourself in some ways. Just try that on for size. I think it's the first step on the hero's journey. There you go.
I like it. Well, something Ole Damegaard mentioned last time we talked, which was a couple days ago, and that interview is up on the site, is, when you have that individual who comes to you, whether they are laying some form of extreme piety on you, I am a person of the mask and you are not, you are a heathen bad person, or they truly are fearful, because some people, they truly do believe all of this and they truly are dreadfully afraid, he would say, just keep saying divine. See that person, see the divinity in them. Just say divine, 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 divine. And it says, when you connect to them, their eyes will change and you will see a flash in their eyes. And, that individual and you will really be communicating. You can make that work. So I think, what Robert Phoenix is saying is something I should start doing on the occasion. I should do that. It would be a good thing for me to do that. I think I'd also just throw in there, have almost like a mantra. Have something like, remember through the entire experience that person is divine and have compassion. However, and I think that altercation, if there is one, will go well. Somehow there'll be a meeting of the mind. It'll be more like, rather than just this rage back and forth that we see all the time and people attacking each other, I think it'd be more like William Buckley and Allen Ginsberg. You may not agree, but there'll be a friendship. There'll be, I think something will happen that is good for everyone involved, rather than just something which you see on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, we've got some comments in chat. People are saying that there's a fine steep fine if you don't wear a mask. And I understand that there are fines in place for people. And you have to, at some point, risk having a fine, because it could be worse. It could be worse. And where does it stop? Where does it stop? If there's a fine, if you can't wear a mask, you have to wear a mask somewhere in a store in the States or elsewhere. Where does that stop? Is it like you if you don't wear a mask, you'll get a bullet to your head? You think I'm kidding? You think I'm just offering up hyperbole? Or if you don't wear a mask, you think there's a van that's going to come by and snatch you up off the streets like they did in China? Like, where's the line? And I get it. I get it. And people have to survive and have to live and have to find a way through the world. I totally get that. I'm not insensitive to that. But people, come on now. We're at a very critical time and a very critical phase. So if you're in England and you have a 1,000-pound fine, if there's 500 of you who get together and go mask free at a store, what kind of statement does that make? Will they be able to fine all of you? What would that do? Maybe it's not even 500. Maybe it's 50. Maybe it's 100. They're counting on us to bend because there's some kind of financial burden that they're going to levy upon us. And again, I'm not insensitive to that, but at some point you're going to have to make a stand. And it better be now where there's a fine involved versus 6 months from now, where if you don't, you're never going to be seen from again. And you think I'm being hyperbolic, I'm not. So just wrap your head around that. And I'm not saying this to make anybody feel that they're impotent in the face of this. I'm actually encouraging you to find ways to overcome that on some level.
Yes, well, it inspires me. You know, I tend to be the gray man that kind of wanders in and out of the store and just comes and goes, and I kind of fight the battle differently. But what you're saying is true. I think that here's the thing with that is and it's a tough one for me because I go, well, if I don't wear a mask in a store and someone says you need to have a mask, well, that's only an employee at that store. You know, it doesn't really get up the chain and make a difference. I would say that definitely if we want to go and, brawl with the people in the store about wearing a mask, we should, definitely. But I also think, taking it a step further, what I'd love to see is more organization around, well, just vote with your dollars too. You know, if a store makes you wear a mask to go in, but another doesn't, don't go to that store. Right. To the extent you have the ability to not support businesses that want you to wear a mask, do that. Because I look at Costco, for instance, they were one of the first to say, got to wear a mask if you want to come in the store. Well, I haven't been there since. And I think that, they only make 3% profit off everything that they sell. It's kind of how their volume model works. If they lost like 10% of sales, they'd have to reverse themselves. So in a sense, it is good to not wear a mask when you go in somewhere, but realize you're only really interacting with that company via an employee level who has no power whatsoever to do anything. But if you don't go, then that changes things. I'm not sure that's really going to work because there's only several. Because in part of this that we're seeing, it's destroying all the small businesses. Then eventually, all we have is Walmart, Costco, and Amazon that exist.
Yeah, I don't think that financial protest really matters much now. I don't think it's that effective. They don't give a shit. They want to reset everything. They'll have about 4 or 5 providers of goods and services, and that's it'll be the Acme version of reality. Wile E. Coyote. Who'd always get the Acme stuff. I mean, that's where everything is headed. So I think that, at the very least, if you want to make some peace with yourself and not shop at a certain place, that's fine. You could do that. You can let your conscience be your guide. In terms of the whole mask thing, and there's a comment in the chat room. It's like $500 for the third offense. It's like you could have your way and I'll have my way, and that's fine. You could do that. You could have that reality. I'm just telling you, if you don't do something about it, your reality is going to get a hell of a lot worse. And I'm just being open and frank here. So you could say that's fine for you. What would I do in a situation like that? I don't know. I'd probably do what I do now, and I'd probably take some kind of risk on some level because that's kind of how I'm wired. I'm not saying this because I'm actually foolish, I believe. To be honest with you, I'm actually foolish. But that's just kind of how I'm wired, and maybe that's why. I don't know. I don't want to get any justification.
I think it's.
But I just think we're at a time. We're at a time, though. I mean, look, if that's the way you want to roll, right? If that's the way you want to roll, then that's fine. Roll that way. But there are things you could do. There are commercial codes that are being violated. Walmart backed off because they were violating the Citizens with Disabilities Act, and they know that. These stores do not want to set themselves up for class action suits. Trust me, they don't. So Walmart, CVS, Walgreens, they all walk back because they know that people know that they could actually go there with them. Okay? So there are things that you can still do. You can educate. Look, this is a time where the true note is in Gemini. And you got to be clever and you got to be crafty. And if you want to wear the mask to blend in, and that's fine, right? I'm not saying that you have to do what I do, but I am telling people that unless we push back on the mask thing, what happens after the mask thing is 100 times worse. So you figure out where you want to, stick your neck out. You want to stick your neck out now? Or do you want to stick your neck out with a guillotine in a FEMA camp? Now, again, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but sometimes you have to get there to kind of get people to understand that there are consequences to these things, and they can be very, very dark consequences.
Oh yeah, what you're saying is true. Yeah, it's totally true. Yeah, and it's I know it's that question that many people ask themselves. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I would say that, yeah, as the individual not wearing the mask, that's definitely one thing that people can do. I mean, it would be a good practice for me to do some. It would actually be a good practice for me to go in and just even just say, I don't need to. I have a medical reason. Even that. I mean, it would not hurt me to do that. That would be a good thing for me to do. It would be a good practice, actually. It would be good for me to do. But also, I would say what I'd love to see is lots and lots of organization on this one, because, yeah, that they do fear class action lawsuits. And also, like, for instance, here in Arizona, they shut the gyms down again. And one of our big gyms, they fought it legally. They lost. They had to close again. But what got me was there were so many people who were like, we will help you fight, like lawyers who were like, they go running for the fight. They go, hey, money, what do you need? So in a sense, like what I'd love to see is just the organized fight, the fight of the individual in one store with one employee. It's good. I'm just not sure that anyone will ever even know what happened. Although what you're saying, it's good. It is good to do. But I think for me, one of the things that I'm always doing, I'm always ready for that fight. Like, who needs money? Who needs effort? Like, where can I help? What can I do? Because I did notice here in Arizona, and I've seen it, like, people are ready for the fight. I mean, they want it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're like, just tell me what I can do, and I will do it. Like, it's great living here. Many people do not buy this nonsense whatsoever. And they're just like, how can I fight? What can I do? We've actually had, I guess they call them like a mask choice protests, basically just protests. We had one down the street at the Scottsdale city government buildings, where people were like, this is nonsense. And that was the protest. They all went there and didn't wear a mask, and they were just like, this is bullshit.
Right.
And so, and that, is only going to get bigger and bigger. So, I guess I'm just praying for, and I'm asking for, and I'm hoping for that momentum of more and more people to find focused ways. It's like when when two armies would, back in the days when we would just fight with shields and spears, these two sides would come together. The one that could break through first and get around and attack the backside of the other would win.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
I'm like, where can we break through and get behind their defenses and just start like General Custer. I don't agree with General Custer very much on many things, but one of the things that he did was when his troops were afraid to fight a battle, he'd go, look, guys, this is a great day to die. If you're coming with me, come with me. If not, I don't care. No hard feelings. But those who are men, let's go.
Right.
And he would ride out in front, and he trained his horse to run into the other soldiers, into their barricades, and he would jump over the horse, get behind them, and start shooting people with his handguns.
Wow.
And his troops would be like, yeah, I got to go. I'm not going to.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I think that's the trick. It's that we've got to find ways to break through. And I'm telling you, I believe there are so many people. If we can line up, they'll fight that battle.
Yeah, I agree. Now, one of the other things that, like you don't always have to go head on too. There are other ways to deal with the system, right? And one of the things that was very prevalent in the 1960s was street theater. You had groups like the Diggers out of San Francisco, Peter Coyote, Emmett Grogan, the Mime Troupe. This idea of street theater could be very effective in a political setting. So what would happen if 10 people went to a supermarket and they were wearing animal masks together, right, to go shop? Now, clearly, here in the state of Texas, it says a face covering. A face covering. That's all it says. That's what the law says. Know your law. Look at what the law says in your state. What is it really saying? Do you really even know it? Have you read the mandate? I mean, that's an important piece too, right? Here in Texas, it says you don't have to wear a mask if you socially distance. That's what it says. And if you do or cannot social distance, you have to wear a face covering. What the heck is a face covering, right? So what would happen if 10 people, 20 people all wore animal masks to go shopping? Because it's a face covering, And, and then what would the effect of that on the people inside of the store do? It would like puncture their reality. And, what would, oh, well, we got a bunch of people in animal masks shopping here. And the cops would hear that. Let's say they call the cops. What would the cops do? They wouldn't know what to do. And it would kind of shock their world. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go at this thing. You don't have to go face first, head on. You can be creative and find other ways to, fuck with the program. And that's really, another opportunity. So if you don't want to be naked and go find some other way, but do something to foul the system.
I like that. Do something. It makes sense. And I think if you want to do something, if you're asking that question to the universe, you say, how can I help? I can only speak for myself, but I think I really am speaking for a universal law. If you ask, it will be given. If you ask, how can I help? A way will arrive. If you don't like wearing masks and you want to, get this, COVID nonsense gone, you want to expose the globalists and you want to just kick this to the curb and go on with our lives. Well, I guarantee ways for you that are specific, that will take some courage, will arrive. So everybody can find it, and I love the idea of the street theater. I mean, that would be great because satire is amazing, and the hilarious mockery you could make over the insanity of the mask and the truth of what it really is about. I mean, memes have power. I mean, that actually gives me ideas. I'm like thinking, yes, should get a little band of people together to do some street art, to do some street performances. I mean, because
absolutely,
you got the truth on your side, and I mean, the truth can meme. Untruth can't meme very well. Truth can meme. And so, I mean, now I'm thinking, that'd be great downtown Phoenix, downtown Scottsdale, have some street performers to just totally, with humor, with kindness, William Buckley, Allen Ginsberg style, kind of mix those two together and just truth bomb this thing.
Absolutely. One of the things that I found is that there's actually, here we go, right here. See, this would be ideal, right? That, let me show this to you guys. Who's your kitty?
That is Alien Cat, or also known as Dahlia, who only wants to show us her butt.
She's proud of the butt. Is that it? Let me show you guys this. So what would happen if 10 people walked into their local market wearing a Fauci face?
Oh my gosh, I want it. Oh my gosh, you serious?
Right? So this is a big head, but there are smaller versions. Now look, if you want to play the game and put a mask on underneath, so you're meeting the standards of your state, well, why not put a Fauci head in front of your mask? You go shop around, because now you're making a statement. Now you got the guy without the mask and he's shopping. What would happen if 10 of you were in the store there are creative things that we can do. You don't have to be a prisoner of the moment, right? And I would wholeheartedly encourage. And again, if you want to play by the rules and play by the book, put your mask on. Put the Fauci face on over the top of it. There you go.
I like it. Wow. I mean, a little Fauci face on your mask. Well, one thing I find that's fun to do, if you are wearing a mask, it's the cheap ass ones you can buy, just the paper, the little whatever cheapy ones, Realize that you can do creative stuff with a Sharpie on those things. You can do like a hashtag PSYOP. You can put security blanket on it. I find it very fun to write things like that. And one of the things is that it's kind of, if you do go somewhere and you have like security blanket or PSYOP on yours or something that you just thought of that day, so far really have not had any hostility towards that. People mostly nod and they go,
right.
Yep. And you might, if you want to find out, if you want to go in somewhere and see who buys it and who doesn't, put hashtag PSYOP on your mask, and you'll find most people are going to be like, yep.
Right. Right. Yeah. And they would be kind of relieved in some ways. It's just like a signal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a signal. Yeah. Craig, this has been great, man. Thank you for being a part of the show today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great. I think maybe I did see in the chat, and sorry I didn't reply to anybody in chat. I didn't have a little way to reply, but I love all the great stuff the Chatlandia was talking about. I did see somebody. I think I saw you at Neil Kramer in 2016 or 17, was it? Anyway, thanks for everybody in Chatlandia for hopping in too. And I think it looks like people were inspired. I'm glad that we helped inspire people. That's the idea of the show that we do over at Rating Creators, is to inspire people. So that's a win for me, and it's been great. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Craig. And I try to keep things as positive as I can. Rating Creators is definitely laced with positivity. So if you're looking for something inspirational, something uplifting, whether it's an interview or some of the products, you're actually selling Masaki's products on your website as well, which are great tools to have, right?
Oh yeah, we linked to that, and we interviewed Masaki, and that's a really fun interview. So yeah. Listen to Masaki and get yourself a pyramid.
All right, Craig, I'm sure we'll be seeing you hopefully in October with our event.
Yes. Yeah, we're not sure what the event is yet. We've heard of the event. I guess the details are on the way.
The details would be they will be released on the full moon in Aquarius, which is just a few days away. So I'm waiting for the right moment in time, and also the ability to marshal my forces to put that forward. So anyway, thanks again, Craig.
Thank you.
All right. Chatlandia, love you. I'll be back on Sunday Night Astro Live. Use your head in order to discern what's real and your heart to say what's possible. Take good care.